The little girl's desperate cry pierced through the dusty New Mexico air. "Papa, God finally answered us." 7-year-old Sophie Carter threw her arms around a stunned stranger's silk skirts, mistaking Clara Ellison for the mother she'd prayed for every night since her mama died. Clara had gotten off at the wrong train station, miles from her intended mail-order groom. But as she looked down at the child's tearful face and met the shocked eyes of widower Daniel Carter, she couldn't have known that sometimes the biggest mistakes lead us exactly where we belong. Dear friends, settle in as I share this remarkable tale. And please, comment below which town you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The late summer heat of 1887 hung heavy over the small train platform at Dust Creek, New Mexico territory. Dust devils danced across the wooden planks as Clara Ellison gathered her courage, along with her traveling cases. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the wrinkles from her best traveling dress, a deep blue silk that had cost her nearly 3 months of her teacher's salary back in Boston. She'd wanted to make a good first impression on Mr. Harold Jameson, the rancher who had placed the advertisement for a mail-order bride in the Eastern papers. The train's whistle shrieked its farewell as it pulled away, leaving Clara standing alone on the platform with her 2 worn leather cases and a heart full of uncertain hope. She looked around the desolate station, searching for any sign of her intended. The telegram had said he would meet her at the station, that he would be wearing a red kerchief and driving a wagon painted green. But the platform stood empty save for a few tumbleweeds and an old hound dog sleeping in the shade. "Mr. Jameson?" Clara called out tentatively, her refined Boston accent seeming out of place in this rough frontier setting. "Mr. Harold Jameson?" The only answer was the mournful cry of a hawk circling overhead. Clara felt the first tendril of panic curl around her heart. She pulled the crumpled telegram from her reticule and read it again. "We'll meet you at station stop. Look for red kerchief and green wagon. H. Jameson." But wait. Her eyes widened as she noticed something she'd overlooked in her nervous excitement. The telegram mentioned Pine Ridge Station, not Dust Creek. In her exhaustion from the 3-day journey, she must have misheard the conductor's call. "Oh no," she whispered, pressing a hand to her corseted stomach. "Oh no, no, no." She was at the wrong station, miles from where she should be, with no idea how to get to Pine Ridge, no money for another ticket, and the next train wouldn't come through for 3 days. Clara felt her knees weaken. What had she done? She'd left everything behind. Her position at the Boston Ladies' Academy, her small but respectable boarding house room, what few friends she had, all for the promise of a new life with a stranger. And now she couldn't even manage to get off at the correct station. "Papa! Papa, come quick!" A child's voice rang out across the dusty main street that ran alongside the platform. Clara turned to see a little girl racing toward her, her brown braids flying behind her, her patched calico dress fluttering in the wind. The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with huge brown eyes that sparkled with an almost fevered excitement. "Papa, she's here!" "She's finally here!" The little girl skidded to a stop just inches from Clara's skirts, staring up at her with wonder. "You're even prettier than I imagined, and you smell like flowers, just like Mama used to." Before Clara could respond, the child threw her arms around Clara's waist, burying her face in the blue silk. "I knew God would answer. I knew it. I prayed every single night, and He sent you." I think there's been some mistake," Clara stammered, gently trying to disengage the child's fierce embrace. "I'm not who you think I am, little one." But the girl only held on tighter. "You came on the train, didn't you? You're wearing a beautiful dress, and you have golden hair just like in my dream. You're the mama God sent us." "Sophie! Sophie Marie Carter, you let go of that lady this instant!" A man's deep voice boomed across the street, and Clara looked up to see a figure striding toward them with long, purposeful steps. As he drew closer, she could make out his features. Sun-weathered skin, dark hair that needed cutting, broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. He wore simple work clothes, dusty from a day's labor, and his gray eyes held a mixture of embarrassment and something else. Was it sorrow? "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am," Daniel Carter said as he reached them, gently but firmly pulling Sophie away from Clara. "My daughter, she's been going through a difficult time since her mother passed." Sophie, you need to apologize to this lady for bothering her. But Papa, Sophie protested, her lower lip trembling, she's the one I told you about, the one from my dreams. God sent her to be our new mama. Daniel's face flushed red beneath his tan. Sophie, we've talked about this. You can't just claim every woman who comes to town as your mother. I'm sorry, ma'am. She doesn't mean any harm. Clara found herself studying the man before her. Despite his rough appearance, there was a gentleness in the way he handled his daughter, a protective quality that spoke of a devoted father. His hands, though calloused and strong, were careful as they rested on Sophie's small shoulders. It's quite all right, Clara said, managing a small smile despite her own predicament. No harm done? Though I'm afraid I'm in a bit of trouble myself. You see, I was supposed to get off at Pine Ridge Station, not here. I meant to meet someone there, and now I'm stranded until the next train comes through. Daniel frowned, his gray eyes showing concern. Pine Ridge is a good 30 miles from here, ma'am, and you said the next train isn't for 3 days? Clara nodded, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders. Yes, I'm afraid so. Is there perhaps a hotel in town where I might stay, or someone who might drive me to Pine Ridge? She tried to keep the desperation out of her voice, but she knew her funds were limited. She'd spent nearly everything on the train ticket and this dress. There's no hotel in Dust Creek, ma'am, Daniel said slowly. It's not much more than a watering stop for the railroad. As for getting to Pine Ridge, tool, he rubbed the back of his neck, thinking. The roads are rough, and with the recent rains, Miller's Creek is running high. It'd be dangerous to attempt the crossing, especially with someone not familiar with the territory. Clara felt her heart sink. What options did she have? She couldn't sleep on the platform for 3 days, and she had maybe enough money for a few meals, certainly not enough to hire someone to make such a dangerous journey. Sophie, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly piped up. She can stay with us, Papa. We have the extra room, the one we don't use anymore. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Clara knew immediately which room the child meant, her mother's room. The awkward silence stretched between them until Daniel finally sighed. Ma'am, I know you don't know us from Adam, but my daughter's right. We do have a spare room, and it wouldn't be Christian to leave a lady stranded with nowhere to stay. Our ranch isn't much, but you're welcome to shelter there until you can catch the next train or figure out other arrangements. Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of impropriety in the offer, but found only genuine concern and perhaps a hint of weariness. She glanced down at Sophie, whose eyes were bright with hope, small hands clasped together as if in prayer. I wouldn't want to impose, Clara began, but even as she said it, she knew she had few alternatives. It's no imposition, Daniel said firmly. My sister-in-law lives just down the road, so there will be no question of propriety. She helps with Sophie when I'm working the cattle. You'd be doing us a favor, really. Sophie could use some company that isn't an old ranch hand or her ornery Aunt Margaret. Aunt Margaret says I talk too much, Sophie confided to Clara, in a whisper that wasn't quite quiet enough. She says I'm wild as a Mustang and need a firm hand, but you won't think I talk too much, will you? You look like you like stories. Mama used to love my stories. Clara's heart melted a little at the child's earnestness. She found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. All right then, Mr. Carter, Daniel Carter, and this little chatterbox is Sophie. Clara Ellison, she replied, offering her hand, which he shook briefly, his calloused palm rough against her gloved fingers. And I do love stories, Sophie. The little girl beamed as if Clara had just offered her the moon. Daniel hefted Clara's traveling cases with an ease that spoke of his physical strength. The wagon's just over here, Miss Ellison. It's about a 20-minute ride to the ranch. As they walked toward a dusty wagon that had seen better days, Clara couldn't help but notice the contrast between this simple, work-worn vehicle and the green-painted wagon she'd been expecting to see. The horses were sturdy but unremarkable, and the bench seat had been mended multiple times with different colored threads. Daniel helped her up onto the seat with surprising gentleness, his hands careful and respectful. Sophie scrambled up between them, practically vibrating with excitement. Papa, can I show her the chickens when we get home? And the new calf? Oh, and my special spot by the creek where the wild roses grow? Let Miss Ellison get settled first, Sophie, Daniel said, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. She's had a long journey. As they rolled away from the station, Clara took in the landscape around her. The terrain was nothing like Boston's gentle hills and established trees. Here, the land stretched endlessly, painted in shades of brown and gold, punctuated by scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks purple against the bright blue sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated her. "Where are you from, Miss Ellison?" Daniel asked, his eyes fixed on the rough road ahead. "Boston," Claire replied. "I was a teacher at the Ladies' Academy there." "A teacher?" Sophie exclaimed. "Did you teach reading?" "I love reading, but Papa says I read too fast and don't save any books for later. We've read all the books we have 3 times already." "Sophie," Daniel warned gently. "It's fine," Clara said, surprising herself with a genuine smile. "I did teach reading, among other subjects: literature, penmanship, a bit of arithmetic, and deportment." "What's deportment?" Sophie asked, scrunching her nose. "It's learning how to behave like a proper lady," Clara explained. Sophie considered this. "Aunt Margaret says I need to learn that. She says I'm wild as a prairie wind. But I think the prairie wind is beautiful, don't you? It sings sometimes, especially at night." Clara found herself charmed by the child's poetic observation. "I think you're right. The wind does sing." As they traveled, Sophie kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about each one. "That's where Papa found me when I got lost last spring. I was following a butterfly and didn't realize how far I'd gone. And over there, that's where we saw the golden eagle. Papa says they're good luck." Daniel occasionally interjected with a quiet correction or gentle reminder to breathe between sentences, but Clara could see the deep affection in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. It was clear that despite their apparent struggles, these two had a bond forged by shared loss and mutual devotion. "How long has it been?" Clara asked quietly, while Sophie was distracted by a jackrabbit racing alongside the wagon. "Since your wife..." Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the reins. 2 years come September. Fever took her. The doc said there was nothing could be done." He paused, then added, "Sophie was only 5. It's been difficult." Clara could hear the understatement in his words. A man trying to run a ranch while raising a young daughter alone, dealing with his own grief while helping a child through hers. She thought of her own losses, her parents' death when she was 17, the fiancé who had broken their engagement when he found someone with a larger dowry. They seemed smaller, somehow, compared to what this man and child had endured. "Papa does everything now," Sophie said, apparently having given up on catching the jackrabbit with her eyes. "He makes breakfast and braids my hair, though not as good as Mama did, and reads to me every night even when he's so tired he falls asleep in the middle of sentences." "Sophie," Daniel said, embarrassment coloring his voice. "It's true," Sophie insisted. "Sophie, last week you fell asleep right when David was about to fight Goliath, and I had to poke you awake because I needed to know what happened even though we've read it 20 times. Despite himself, Daniel chuckled. "She's right. I'm not much of a substitute for her mother, I'm afraid." "You're doing wonderfully, Papa," Sophie said with such fierce loyalty that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You're the best papa in the whole territory. In the whole world, probably." The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well maintained. The main house was built of adobe and timber with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. There was a barn that looked newer than the house, several corrals, and what appeared to be a thriving vegetable garden protected by a fence that was fighting a losing battle against the rabbits, judging by the patches that had been recently mended. "It's not much," Daniel said, a note of apology in his voice as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "It's lovely," Clara said, and meant it. There was something honest about the place, something real and solid that her life in Boston had lacked. "You've built a good home here." Daniel looked surprised by the compliment, as if he hadn't expected someone from the city to appreciate his simple ranch. "Thank you, Miss Ellison. I'll show you to your room so you can get settled." The inside of the house was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and while everything was tidy, there were no curtains at the windows, no tablecloth on the rough wooden table, no pictures on the walls save for a single photograph on the mantel. a woman with Sophie's eyes and Daniel's smile, frozen in sepia tones. Sophie must have noticed Clara looking at the photograph. "That's Mama," she said softly. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" "Very beautiful," Clara agreed. "She used to sing while she cooked," Sophie continued, "and she made the best apple pie in the territory. Papa tries, but his crust is always tough." "I'm standing right here, you know," Daniel said with mock offense. Sophie giggled, the melancholy moment passing. "Can you cook, Miss Clara?" "Sophie, don't be rude," Daniel admonished. "I can," Clara said. "In fact, if you'd allow me, Mr. Carter, I'd be happy to prepare dinner tonight. It's the least I can do to repay your hospitality." Daniel looked like he might protest, but Sophie jumped in before he could. "Oh, please, Papa. We've had beans and biscuits for 3 days straight." "There's nothing wrong with beans and biscuits," Daniel said defensively, but Clara caught the gleam of hope in his eyes. "Perhaps I could make something a little different," Clara suggested. "If you have the supplies, that is." Daniel showed her to the kitchen, which was better stocked than she'd expected. There was flour, salt pork, preserved vegetables, dried beans, and even some precious white sugar. "My sister-in-law, Margaret, brings supplies once a week," he explained. "She thinks we'll starve otherwise." "Aunt Margaret can't cook either," Sophie whispered conspiratorially. "She burns everything because she's too busy talking about what's proper and what's not." "Sophie Marie," Daniel warned, but his lips twitched with suppressed amusement. Clara spent the next hour preparing a simple but hearty meal: fried chicken using a bird from the coop, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans seasoned with salt pork, and using the last of the day's milk. She even managed a simple custard for dessert. As she worked, Sophie sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly doing her letters but really watching Clara's every move with fascination. "You move like you're dancing," Sophie observed. "Mama used to move like that when she cooked." Clara paused in her stirring, touched by the comparison. "Your mama must have been a wonderful cook." "She was wonderful at everything," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Papa says I have her spirit." "I can see that," Clara said, noting the way the child's eyes sparkled with life despite the sadness that occasionally dimmed them. Daniel came in from tending the animals just as Clara was setting the table. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene, the table properly set, steam rising from dishes that actually matched, his daughter chattering happily as she helped carry plates. "I haven't seen her this animated in months," he said quietly, so only Clara could hear. Dinner was a revelation. Daniel ate like a man who'd forgotten food could be more than mere sustenance, and Sophie talked non-stop between bites, telling Clara about everything from her favorite hiding spots to her theory that their rooster was actually a prince under a curse. "This is the best meal I've had in 2 years, Daniel finally said, pushing back from his empty plate. "Thank you, Miss Ellison." "It was my pleasure," Clara said, and found she meant it. There was something deeply satisfying about watching this little family enjoy her cooking, something that filled a hollow space she hadn't known existed in her chest. After dinner, Clara insisted on cleaning up despite Daniel's protests. Sophie helped dry dishes, standing on a wooden crate to reach the counter, still talking a mile a minute. "Do you know any songs, Miss Clara?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Mama used to sing to me every night before bed. Papa tries, but he says he sounds like a crow with a sore throat." "I do not," Daniel protested from where he was sitting by the fire, working on mending a bridle. "You do too," Sophie said cheerfully. "Remember when you tried to sing Amazing Grace at the church social? Mrs. Henderson's baby started crying." Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised her. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? "I do know some songs," she admitted. "Would you like me to sing one while we finish up here?" Sophie nodded eagerly, and even Daniel looked up from his work with interest. Clara began with Shenandoah, her clear soprano voice filling the small kitchen. Sophie stopped drying dishes to listen, her eyes wide with wonder. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "You have a beautiful voice, Miss Ellison," Daniel said softly. "Thank you for sharing it with us." "Sing another," Sophie pleaded. "Please?" So Clara sang Barbara Allen while they finished the dishes, and then The Water is Wide while Sophie got ready for bed. By the time she tucked the little girl in, Daniel having given her permission when Sophie begged, the child's eyes were heavy with sleep. Miss Clara, Sophie said drowsily, I know you have to meet that man at the other station, but couldn't you just forget about him and stay here instead? We need you more than he does. Clara's heart clenched. Oh, sweetheart, I prayed for you, Sophie continued, her voice getting softer as sleep pulled her under. Every night since Mama went to heaven, I prayed God would send us someone. And he sent you. Even if it was to the wrong station, maybe it wasn't wrong at all. Clara smoothed the child's hair back from her forehead, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When Sophie's breathing evened out into sleep, Clara quietly left the room. Daniel was waiting in the main room, 2 cups of coffee on the table beside him. I'm sorry about that, he said. She shouldn't have said those things, put you in that position. Clara sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. She's a wonderful little girl, Mr. Carter. You've done an amazing job with her. I muddle through, Daniel said, but Clara could see the pleasure her words gave him. Can I ask you something, Miss Ellison? It's none of my business, but why would a woman like you, educated, refined, clearly capable, answer a mail-order bride advertisement? Clara was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. My parents died when I was 17, she finally said. I had to make my own way, so I became a teacher. I was engaged once, but he found someone with better financial prospects. I suppose I reached a point where I wanted something different, something real. The advertisement seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. And now you're stuck in Dust Creek instead of meeting your intended, Daniel said with sympathy. Yes, Clara agreed, but even as she said it, she found herself thinking that stuck wasn't quite the right word. There was something about this place, these people, that felt more like home than anywhere she'd been since her parents died. Tell me about your ranch, she said, changing the subject. Have you been here long? Daniel's face relaxed as he talked about the land he clearly loved. He'd come to New Mexico 5 years ago with his wife, Emma, and baby Sophie, seeking their own piece of land after working for other men all his life. They'd built the house together, board by board, fighting weather and isolation and countless setbacks. Emma never complained, he said, his voice soft with memory. Even when things were at their worst, when we lost our first crop to drought, when Sophie got sick and we thought we'd lose her too, Emma just said God had a plan and we needed to trust it. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Clara said gently. She was, Daniel agreed. I've been lost without her, to be honest. Oh, I keep the ranch running, and I do my best with Sophie, but it's like I'm just going through the motions, you know? Like I'm waiting for something, but I don't know what. The honesty in his voice, the raw vulnerability, made Clara's chest tight. Without thinking, she reached across the table and laid her hand over his. You're doing more than going through the motions, Mr. Carter. You're raising a wonderful, spirited, loving little girl. You're maintaining a home and a ranch. You're surviving, and some days, that's all any of us can do. Daniel stared at her hand on his, and Clara suddenly realized the impropriety of the gesture. She started to pull away, but he turned his hand over and squeezed hers briefly before letting go. Thank you, he said simply. That means more than you know. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and listening to the crackle of the fire. Finally, Daniel stood. I should show you to your room. You must be exhausted from your travels. The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a hand-sewn quilt, a washstand with a china basin, and a single window that looked out toward the mountains. Clara could tell it had been recently aired and dusted. This was Emma's sewing room, Daniel said from the doorway. She liked the morning light. Sophie was right. We don't use it anymore. Haven't been able to bring ourselves to change anything. Clara could see the evidence of the room's former purpose, a basket of fabric scraps in the corner, a half-finished sampler on the small table by the window. It's perfect, Mr. Carter. Thank you. Daniel nodded and turned to go, then paused. Miss Ellison? I'm glad you got off at the wrong station. I mean, that is, Sophie hasn't been this happy in a long time. It's good to hear her laugh again. Before Clara could respond, he was gone, his boot steps fading down the hall. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling. In a few days, she would catch the train to Pine Ridge and meet Harold Jameson as planned. She would become a rancher's wife, would build a life with a stranger she'd only exchanged a few letters with. That was still the plan. But as she changed into her nightgown and slipped between the cool sheets, she found herself thinking not of Harold Jameson, but of gray eyes filled with sorrow and strength, of a little girl who prayed for a mother, of a home that needed exactly what she had to offer. Outside her window, a coyote howled in the distance, and the prairie wind sang its lonely song. Clara closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Sophie's voice carrying from the kitchen. Clara dressed quickly and made her way to find the little girl attempting to make breakfast, flour covering most of the kitchen and herself. "I wanted to surprise you," Sophie said, her lower lip trembling. "But I can't remember how much salt goes in the biscuits, and I dropped an egg and—" "Shh, it's all right," Clara soothed, surveying the damage. "Why don't we clean this up together and start over? I'll teach you how to make biscuits that are so light they float off the plate." Sophie brightened immediately. "Really? You'll teach me?" "Of course." They spent the next hour cooking together, Clara showing Sophie how to measure ingredients, how to handle the dough gently so the biscuits would be tender, how to tell when they were perfectly golden. Daniel came in just as they were pulling the second batch from the oven. "What's all this?" he asked, though his smile showed he wasn't upset about the mess they'd made. "Miss Clara's teaching me to cook," Sophie announced proudly. "Look, Papa, I made these ones all by myself." Daniel dutifully admired his daughter's handiwork, though Clara noticed him discreetly choosing one of hers when it came time to eat. The biscuits were served with butter and honey from their own hive, along with eggs and thick-sliced bacon. "I have to ride out to check the fence lines today," Daniel said as they ate. "The storm last week might have brought some down. Sophie, you need to do your lessons." "But Papa—" "No arguments, young lady. You've been neglecting them all week." Sophie's face fell. Clara recognized the look of a child faced with the prospect of lonely, boring work. "I could help her," Clara offered. "If that's all right with you, Mr. Carter." "I was a teacher, after all." Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, could she, Papa? Please." Daniel looked between them, and Clara could see him wrestling with himself, wanting to maintain boundaries but also wanting his daughter to be happy and educated. "If Miss Ellison doesn't mind," he said finally, "but you mind her like you would your regular teacher, Sophie." "I will, I promise." After Daniel rode out, Clara and Sophie settled at the kitchen table with the child's primers and slate. It became immediately apparent that Sophie was bright, perhaps too bright for the simple lessons she'd been doing. "You're already reading at a much higher level than these books," Clara observed after listening to Sophie read aloud. "Have you read all the books in the house?" Sophie nodded. 3 times, like I said. Papa says we can't afford new ones right now, not with needing to buy seed for next year and fix the barn roof." Clara made a mental note of this. She had brought several books with her, novels and poetry collections she'd thought might comfort her in her new life. She could certainly spare a few for an eager young reader. They spent the morning working through lessons, but Clara made them interesting, using examples from the ranch and encouraging Sophie to write stories about her daily life. When they took a break, Sophie showed Clara around the property. The chicken coop where she'd named every hen, the garden where she helped plant vegetables, the barn where a new calf had been born just weeks ago. "This is my favorite place," Sophie said, leading Clara to a spot by the creek where wild roses grew in profusion despite the arid climate. "Mama and I used to come here for picnics. She said the roses were like hope. They bloomed even in the hardest ground." Clara felt her eyes mist at the child's words. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise." "She was," Sophie agreed, then looked up at Clara with those too perceptive eyes. "You're wise too, I think, and kind. Mr. Jameson is very lucky." Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't try. Instead, she helped Sophie gather some of the roses to bring back to the house, their sweet scent filling the kitchen when they put them in an old mason jar. That afternoon, while Sophie practiced her penmanship, Clara took inventory of the kitchen and made a list of what could be done with the available supplies. She found herself planning meals in her head, thinking about how to stretch the food budget while still providing nutrition and variety. It was a puzzle she enjoyed solving. When Daniel returned near sunset, dusty and tired, He found dinner waiting, a pot roast she'd started early in the day, with vegetables from the garden and fresh bread she'd taught Sophie to make. "You don't have to do this, Miss Ellison," he said, but she could see the gratitude in his eyes. "You're our guest." "I enjoy it," Clara said honestly. "It's nice to cook for people who appreciate it." Over dinner, Sophie regaled her father with everything she'd learned that day, from the new arithmetic method Clara had shown her to the story she'd written about their rooster's adventures. "She's a natural storyteller," Clara told Daniel. "With the right encouragement and education, she could do anything she wants." Daniel's face showed a mixture of pride and worry. "Out here, most girls just need to know enough to run a household and help with the ranch work." "Perhaps," Clara said carefully, "but there's no harm in being prepared for more, is there?" That evening, after Sophie had been put to bed with another song and a story, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. The night was cool, a blessed relief from the day's heat, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. "I've been thinking," Daniel said suddenly, "about what you said, being prepared for more. I want that for Sophie. I want her to have choices I never had, opportunities her mother and I couldn't give her." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I wrote to a mail-order bride service myself, about 6 months ago." Clara turned to look at him, surprised. "I never sent the letter," he continued. "Couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like I was betraying Emma's memory. But Sophie needs a mother, and the ranch needs a woman's touch, and it gets lonely out here." "What stopped you from sending it?" Clara asked softly. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Fear, I suppose. Fear that whoever came wouldn't love Sophie the way she deserves. Fear that I'd be settling for convenience instead of what I had with Emma. Fear that I'm too set in my ways, too broken by loss to be a good husband to anyone." Clara felt a deep sympathy for this man who was trying so hard to do right by everyone but himself. "You're not broken, Mr. Carter. You're grieving. There's a difference." "Is there?" he asked, and the vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. "Yes," she said firmly. "Broken things can't be fixed. But grief eventually becomes bearable. It becomes part of you, but not all of you." "Speaking from experience?" "Yes," Clara admitted. "Different from yours, but yes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Daniel said, "That man in Pine Ridge, Mr. Jameson, do you care for him?" It was an improper question, but Clara found she didn't mind. "I don't know him well enough to care for him," she said honestly. "We've exchanged a handful of letters. He seems respectable, established. He promised a good home and a stable life. But," Clara smiled slightly, "how did you know there was a but? The way you said it, like you were trying to convince yourself." Clara considered this. "I suppose I'm wondering if respectable and stable are enough. If I'm settling for safety instead of something more." "And what would more look like?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Clara turned to look at him, finding his gray eyes intent on her face. In the moonlight, she could see the strong lines of his jaw, the way his work-worn hands rested on his knees. "I don't know," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she thought maybe she was beginning to understand. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Then Daniel cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest." Clara nodded and rose as well. As she passed him to go inside, he caught her arm gently. "Miss Ellison, Clara, thank you for everything you've done for Sophie, for us. These 2 days they've been a gift." "You're welcome," Clara whispered, and went inside before she could say or do something foolish. That night, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of her tumultuous feelings. In less than 2 days, she would board the train for Pine Ridge. She would meet Harold Jameson and become his wife, would start the life she'd planned when she'd answered that advertisement. But as she finally drifted towards sleep, her dreams were filled not with the unknown face of her intended, but with gray eyes and work-worn hands, with a little girl's laughter and the scent of wild roses by a creek. The next morning brought clouds on the horizon, the promise of much-needed rain. Daniel announced at breakfast that he needed to move the cattle to higher ground before the storm hit. Can I come with you, Papa? Sophie asked hopefully. Not this time, sweetheart. It's going to be a hard ride, and I need to move fast. Sophie's disappointment was palpable. Clara, seeing an opportunity, suggested, Why don't we bake something special for when your father returns? We could make that apple pie you mentioned. Sophie perked up slightly. But we don't have any apples. No, but you have those preserved peaches in the cellar. I bet we could make a peach pie that would rival any apple pie. Daniel shot her a grateful look. That sounds wonderful. I'll be back before dark if all goes well. After he left, Clara and Sophie threw themselves into the project of pie making. Clara taught Sophie how to make a flaky crust, how to roll it thin without tearing, how to crimp the edges just so. They made 2 pies, one for dinner and one for just because, as Sophie put it. While the pies baked, filling the house with the sweet scent of peaches and cinnamon, they worked on more lessons. Clara had retrieved one of her books, a collection of fairy tales, and Sophie's eyes went wide with delight. These are new stories, she exclaimed. I've never read any of these. The book is yours, Clara said impulsively. A gift. Sophie threw her arms around Clara's waist. Really? My very own book that I've never read before? Really? Sophie pulled back, her face serious. Miss Clara, I know you have to leave tomorrow, but will you write to us? Will you tell us about your new life in Pine Ridge? Clara's throat tightened. Of course I will, sweetheart. And maybe you could visit sometimes. Pine Ridge isn't so very far. We'll see, Clara said, though she knew it would be unlikely. Once she was married to Harold Jameson, it would be inappropriate to visit a single man and his daughter, no matter how innocent the friendship. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Clara opened it to find a stern-faced woman in her 50s dressed in severe black despite the heat, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. You must be the woman from the train, the woman said without preamble. I'm Margaret Thornton, Daniel's sister-in-law. I heard we had a visitor. Clara Ellison, Clara replied, extending her hand, which Margaret shook briefly. Margaret swept into the house like a force of nature, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The clean kitchen, the pies cooling on the windowsill, Sophie's happy face as she read her new book. Sophie, you're covered in flour, Margaret said critically. What would your mother think? Sophie's happiness dimmed. Mama wouldn't mind. She used to say that flour in your hair meant you'd been doing good work. Margaret sniffed. Your mother had some peculiar ideas. Run along and wash up. Sophie reluctantly put down her book and went to clean herself, shooting Clara an apologetic look. So, Margaret said, turning her attention to Clara, I heard you're on your way to Pine Ridge to marry some rancher. Yes, Clara confirmed, though she found herself reluctant to discuss it. Good. Daniel doesn't need any more complications in his life. He's had a hard enough time since Emma passed, trying to run this ranch and raise that wild child. Sophie's not wild, Clara said, surprising herself with the defensive tone in her voice. She's spirited and intelligent. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You've known the girl for 2 days. I've been helping raise her for 2 years. She needs a firm hand and proper discipline, not someone filling her head with fairy tales and fancy ideas. Clara bit her tongue, recognizing that this woman, however harsh she seemed, had been helping Daniel and Sophie when they needed it most. Margaret continued her inspection of the house, making comments about everything from the placement of the dishes to the way Clara had organized the pantry. When Sophie returned, clean-faced but subdued, Margaret announced she was taking the girl back to her house for the night. But Papa said I could stay here, Sophie protested. Your father isn't thinking clearly, Margaret said. It's not proper for you to be staying here with an unmarried woman under the roof and your father away. You'll come with me, and we'll work on your embroidery. Heaven knows you need the practice. Sophie looked to Clara desperately, but Clara felt helpless to intervene. Margaret was right about the propriety issue, even if her approach left much to be desired. Take your new book, Clara suggested gently, and I'll save you a piece of pie for tomorrow. Sophie hugged Clara tightly, whispering, She means well, but she doesn't understand. Not like you do. After they left, the house felt oppressively quiet. Clara tried to busy herself with preparing dinner, but her heart wasn't in it. She kept thinking about Sophie's sad face, about how the light had gone out of her eyes when Margaret criticized her. Daniel returned just as the sun was setting, tired and dusty, but satisfied that the cattle were safe. He looked around the empty house with confusion. "Where's Sophie?" "Your sister-in-law came and took her for the night," Claire explained. "She said it wasn't proper." Daniel's jaw tightened. Margaret means well, but sometimes... He trailed off, then noticed the pies. "You made pie?" "Sophie and I made them together." She's a quick learner. They ate dinner quietly, both aware of Sophie's absence. Finally, Daniel said, "Margaret's been after me to remarry. She has someone in mind, a widow from Santa Fe. Very proper, very respectable." Clara concentrated on her plate. "That sounds suitable." "Does it?" Daniel asked, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. Because from where I'm sitting, suitable sounds like another word for settling. Their eyes met and held across the table, and Clara felt something electric pass between them. "Mr. Carter." "Daniel," he corrected. "Please." "Daniel," she said, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "We shouldn't—" "I know," he said. "You're leaving tomorrow. You have plans, a future waiting for you. I know all of that. But Clara, these past 3 days, it's like the house has come alive again. Sophie is happier than I've seen her since Emma died. And He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You what?" Claire asked softly. "I find myself wishing you'd gotten off at the wrong station on purpose," he admitted. "I find myself angry at this Jameson fellow who doesn't even know what he has waiting for him. I find myself thinking about what it would be like if you stayed." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Daniel, I know I have no right to say these things," he continued. "I have nothing to offer compared to what's waiting for you in Pine Ridge. Just a struggling ranch, a motherless child, and a widower who's forgotten how to hope for anything beyond making it through another day. But Clara, when you're here, I remember. I remember what it's like to look forward to coming home. I remember what laughter sounds like in these walls." Clara stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. She walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Do you know what Sophie said to me that first day?" she asked. "She said God sent me, that she'd prayed every night for a mother, and I appeared." "Sophie says a lot of things," Daniel said carefully. "But what if she's right?" Clara turned to face him. "What if there are no accidents? What if I was meant to get off at this station, to meet you and Sophie?" Daniel stood slowly, moving toward her with the careful grace of a man approaching something fragile and precious. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Claire admitted. 3 days ago, I had everything planned out. I was going to marry Harold Jameson, be a rancher's wife, have a respectable life. But now... "Now?" Daniel prompted, standing close enough that she could smell the leather and sage scent of him. "Now I find myself thinking that respectable isn't enough. That maybe what I was really looking for when I answered that advertisement wasn't safety or stability, but a place to belong. A place where I'm needed, not just useful. A place where my presence matters." "You matter here," Daniel said quietly, "more than you could possibly know." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Don't say things you don't mean." "I never say things I don't mean," Daniel said. "I'm not good with words like Emma was. But I know what I feel, and I know that tomorrow, when you get on that train, you'll be taking something with you that I'm not sure I can afford to lose." "What?" Clara whispered. "Hope," he said simply. "You'll be taking my hope with you." The air between them crackled with tension and possibility. Clara knew she should step back, should maintain the proper distance between them. Tomorrow she would leave, would go to her intended, would live the life she'd planned. But tonight she wanted to pretend that she belonged here, in this simple house with its memories and its ghosts, with this good man who'd known real love and real loss, with a little girl who needed her in a way no one had ever needed her before. "I should go to bed," she said, though she made no move to leave. "You should," Daniel agreed, not moving either. They stood there for a long moment, on the precipice of something that couldn't be taken back once acknowledged. Then Daniel stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Clara," he said formally. I'll take you to the station in the morning." "Good night, Daniel," she replied, and fled to her room before she could do something foolish like ask him to give her a reason to stay. The morning came wrapped in gray clouds, heavy with the promise of rain that had been threatening since yesterday. Clara woke before dawn, unable to sleep with the weight of what this day meant. Through her window, she could see Daniel already at work in the barn, his silhouette moving with practiced efficiency as he tended to the morning chores. In just a few hours, he would drive her to the station, and she would board the train to Pine Ridge and the life that waited for her there. She dressed carefully in her traveling dress, the blue silk that had seemed so important just 3 days ago. Now it felt like armor, something to remind her of who she was supposed to be. A proper Boston lady on her way to meet her intended, not a woman who'd spent 3 days falling in love with a widowed rancher and his daughter. The words stopped her cold. Love. Was that what this was? Could you really fall in love in 3 days? Or was she simply swept up in the romance of it all? The motherless child, the grieving father, the sense of being needed. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Sophie standing there, still in her nightgown, her hair mussed from sleep and her eyes red from crying. "Sophie! What are you doing here? I thought you were at your Aunt Margaret's." "I snuck out," Sophie confessed, throwing her arms around Clara's waist. "I climbed out the window and ran all the way here. My feet hurt, and I think I tore my nightgown on a bush, but I had to see you before you left. I had to try one more time." Clara's heart broke a little as she held the trembling child. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't have done that. Your aunt will be worried sick." "No, she won't. She doesn't check on me until after she's had her morning tea and read her Bible. That's at least another hour." Sophie pulled back, her brown eyes desperate. "Miss Clara, please don't go. Please. I know Mr. Jameson is expecting you, but we need you more. Papa needs you, even if he's too stubborn to say it properly. And I need you. I need you so much it hurts right here." She pressed her small hand to her chest. "Sophie, I heard Aunt Margaret talking to Mrs. Henderson yesterday. She said she's bringing that widow from Santa Fe to meet Papa next week. Her name is Mrs. Hargrove, and Aunt Margaret says she's very proper and knows how to run a household and will teach me to be a lady. But I don't want to be her kind of lady. I want to be your kind, the kind who makes pie and tells stories and doesn't mind flour in her hair." Clara knelt down to Sophie's level, taking the child's hands in hers. "Listen to me, sweetheart. Your papa is a good man, and he'll make the right choice for both of you. If this Mrs. Hargrove, she'll make him miserable," Sophie interrupted with the certainty only a child could muster. "She'll make everything proper and cold, just like Aunt Margaret wants. The house will be clean, but it won't be home. Papa will do his duty, but he won't smile the way he does when you're here. And I'll learn to embroider and sit still, but I'll forget how to dream." The raw honesty in the child's words hit Clara like a physical blow. She pulled Sophie close again, feeling the little girl's tears soak through her dress. "Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do," Clara said softly, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. "Sometimes we make promises, and we have to keep them even when our hearts tell us different." "But you didn't promise Mr. Jameson your heart," Sophie said with startling insight. "You just promised to meet him." "You met us instead. Maybe God knew what he was doing." Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "Sophie Marie Carter, what in the blazes are you doing here?" They both turned to find him standing there, his expression a mixture of concern and frustration. His hair was damp with morning dew, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek that somehow made him even more appealing. "I had to try, Papa," Sophie said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Someone had to be brave enough to say what we're all thinking." "Sophie, that's enough. You're going to march yourself right back to Aunt Margaret's before she notices you're gone, and we're going to have a serious talk about climbing out windows and—" "No," Sophie said firmly, "not until you tell Miss Clara the truth. Sophie, tell her about the letter, Papa, the one you wrote but never sent. Tell her what it said." Daniel's face flushed. "How do you know about that?" "I can read, Papa. You left it on your desk, and I was looking for paper to practice my letters." Sophie turned to Clara. "He wrote that he wanted someone who would love me like her own daughter, someone who would bring laughter back to our home, someone who could see beauty in simple things and wouldn't mind the isolation, someone who could be a partner,
not just a wife. "Sophie, stop," Daniel said quietly, but his eyes were on Clara's face.
He wrote that he was tired of being alone, Sophie continued relentlessly. That he wanted to love again, even if it scared him. That he wanted someone to share the sunsets with, someone to talk to after we're asleep, someone who would make the house smell like bread and fill the silence with singing. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Daniel, who seemed frozen in place, his jaw tight with emotion. "Is that true?" she asked softly. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Every word. But I never sent it because I thought it was asking too much. What woman would want to come to a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere, to raise another woman's child, to try to fill shoes that can't be filled?" "The right woman would," Clara said, standing slowly. "The right woman would see it as an honor, not a burden. The right woman would love Sophie not in spite of her spirit, but because of it. The right woman would understand that she's not replacing anyone, but creating something new." "And are you the right woman?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with hope and fear in equal measure. Before Clara could answer, the sound of a wagon approaching made them all turn toward the window. Margaret's imposing figure could be seen driving toward the house, her posture rigid with disapproval. "Oh no," Sophie whispered. "She's going to be so angry." Margaret burst through the door moments later without knocking, her face flushed with indignation. "Sophie Marie Carter, you willful, disobedient child! How dare you climb out of my window like some common hoyden? And you," she rounded on Daniel, "allowing her to run wild like this. Emma would be rolling in her grave." "Don't you dare bring Emma into this," Daniel said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Margaret ignored him, turning her wrath on Clara. "And you, I suppose you think you're quite clever, turning this child's head with your city ways and your fancy cooking. Well, let me tell you something, Miss Ellison. This family doesn't need another dreamer. They need someone practical, someone who understands the realities of ranch life." "Like Mrs. Hargrove?" Sophie asked innocently. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about Mrs. Hargrove?" "I heard you talking to Mrs. Henderson. You said she was perfect for Papa, that she'd bring order and discipline." "And she will," Margaret said firmly. "She's arriving next week, and she's exactly what this family needs. Someone with experience, someone who knows how to run a proper household and raise a child correctly." "I don't need raising correctly," Sophie said, her voice small but determined. "I need love." "Love doesn't put food on the table or keep a ranch running," Margaret snapped. "No," Daniel said suddenly, "but it makes all that work worthwhile." "Margaret, I appreciate everything you've done for us since Emma died. You've been a help when we needed it, but you don't get to decide who comes into our lives or how we choose to live." Margaret's face went red, then white. "Daniel Carter, you're not thinking clearly. This woman," she gestured dismissively at Clara, "is engaged to another man. She's leaving today, and you're going to throw away a chance at a sensible match. For what? A fantasy?" "It's not a fantasy," Clara heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood straighter, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "What Daniel and Sophie have offered me, a place where I'm valued, where my presence matters, where I can make a real difference. That's not a fantasy. That's more real than anything waiting for me in Pine Ridge." "You don't even know these people," Margaret protested. "I know enough," Clara said firmly. "I know that Sophie has the kind of spirit that should be nurtured, not crushed. I know that Daniel works himself to exhaustion, trying to be both mother and father, trying to keep this ranch going while his heart is still healing. I know that this house has been waiting for someone to make it a home again, not just a place to sleep and eat." "And you think you're that someone?" Margaret asked scathingly. Clara looked at Daniel, then at Sophie, who was watching her with desperate hope. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'd like the chance to find out." The room fell silent. Margaret looked between them all, her expression shifting from anger to something like disgust. "Well, I can see I'm wasting my breath here. Daniel, when this all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. I'll send Mrs. Hargrove away, but don't think I'll forget this foolishness." She swept toward the door, then turned back. "And Sophie, you're getting too old for such behavior. It's time you learned that life isn't a fairy tale." After she left, the three of them stood in awkward silence. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Clara, you don't have to, what you said to Margaret, I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated, Clara interrupted, but I do need to know something. If I stay, if I send a telegram to Mr. Jameson telling him I won't be coming, what am I staying for? A job as your housekeeper? A governess for Sophie? Or ... quote. Daniel crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. If you stay as my intended. We'll do this properly. A courtship. Time to get to know each other better. Time for you to be sure this is what you want. But Clara, if you stay, I want you to stay with the understanding that I'm already half in love with you, and falling the rest of the way won't take long. Sophie made a sound that was half squeal, half sob, and threw her arms around both of them. Does this mean you're staying? Really staying? Clara looked down at the hopeful child, then up at Daniel's weathered face, seeing in his gray eyes a future she'd never dared to imagine, one filled with purpose and belonging and maybe, just maybe, love. I need to send a telegram, she said softly. Daniel's face lit up with a smile that transformed him, making him look years younger. I'll take you to town right now. Can I come? Sophie asked eagerly. You, Daniel said, trying to sound stern but failing completely. Need to get dressed first. You can't go to town in your nightgown. Sophie raced off to change, leaving Daniel and Clara alone. He was still holding her hands, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. Are you sure about this? He asked. You're giving up a lot. The certainty of what was planned, a man who might be able to offer you more. I'm not giving up anything, Claire said. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Daniel lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I'll make you happy, Clara. I swear I will. It might not be the life you imagined, but the life I imagined was empty, Clara interrupted. It was about safety and propriety and doing what was expected. This is about living, really living. Sophie burst back into the room, dressed but with her hair still wild and her boots on the wrong feet. I'm ready. Let's go tell Mr. Jameson that Miss Clara belongs to us now. Sophie, we're not telling him that, Daniel said, fighting a smile. But it's true, isn't it? Sophie asked. She's ours now? Clara knelt down and fixed Sophie's boots, then tried to tame her wild hair into something resembling braids. If you'll have me, she said softly. Sophie's answer was to throw her arms around Clara's neck so tightly she could barely breathe. Forever and ever and ever, the child whispered. The ride to town was unlike the first one 3 days ago. Sophie sat between them on the wagon seat, chattering non-stop about all the things they would do now that Clara was staying. She had plans for everything from redecorating the house to planting a bigger garden to teaching Clara how to ride a horse. Sophie, let Miss Clara breathe, Daniel said, but he was smiling. She might change her mind if you overwhelm her with all your plans at once. I won't change my mind, Clara said firmly, and was rewarded with another of Daniel's transformative smiles. The telegraph office was in the general store, and Mr. Patterson, the proprietor, looked up with interest as they entered. Clara could practically see him cataloging every detail to share with the town gossips later. Need to send a telegram, Miss Ellison, Daniel said. Certainly, Mr. Patterson said, his eyes bright with curiosity. Where to? Pine Ridge, Clara said, taking the pencil and paper he offered. She thought for a moment, then wrote, Mr. Jameson. Regret to inform, cannot complete journey. Circumstances have changed. Wish you well in your search. C. Ellison. It seemed inadequate, almost cruel in its brevity, but what else could she say? That she'd fallen in love with the wrong man at the wrong station? That a 7-year-old girl's prayers had been answered in the most unexpected way? Mr. Patterson read the message, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. Want to send this right away? Please, Clara said. As Mr. Patterson went to send the message, Sophie tugged on Clara's sleeve. Should we buy fabric for new curtains while we're here? The house needs curtains, something awful. Sophie, we don't have money for... Daniel began. I have some money, Clara said quietly. Not much, but enough for fabric and a few other necessities. I can't take your money, Daniel protested. You're not taking it. I'm investing it. In our home. The word our hung in the air between them, full of promise and commitment. Daniel's hand found hers and squeezed gently. They spent the next hour in the general store, Sophie helping Clara pick out fabric for curtains, a cheerful yellow gingham that would brighten the main room, and Clara adding a few items to their purchases. New readers for Sophie, basic school supplies, and impulsively, a packet of flower seeds. For the garden, she explained when Daniel raised an eyebrow. Sophie and I will plant them together. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Clara noticed several townspeople watching them with undisguised interest. News of her staying would be all over the territory by nightfall, she was sure. Are you ready for this? Daniel asked quietly, apparently noticing the same thing. Small-town gossip can be vicious. Let them talk, Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. They'll have something new to gossip about soon enough. The ride home was quieter, Sophie having exhausted herself with excitement and now leaning drowsily against Clara's shoulder. Daniel drove with one hand, his other resting on the seat behind them, his fingers occasionally brushing Clara's shoulder in a touch that was both protective and possessive. We should talk about the practicalities, Daniel said as the ranch came into view. I want to court you properly, Clara. You deserve that. But out here, propriety is complicated. I can't ask you to leave, not when you've given up everything else, but I also can't have you staying in the house without some kind of understanding. What kind of understanding? Clara asked. I thought if you're agreeable, we could announce our engagement. A long engagement, he added quickly. 6 months, maybe longer if you need it. That would make it acceptable for you to stay at the ranch, help with Sophie, get to know the life here. And if you decide it's not what you want, I won't, Clara interrupted. But if you do, Daniel continued firmly, you'll be free to leave. No questions, no accusations. I'll even pay for your ticket to wherever you want to go. Clara was touched by his consideration, his determination to give her choices, even as his eyes betrayed how much he hoped she wouldn't take them. 6 months, she agreed, though I suspect I'll be ready much sooner than that. Daniel's hand found hers again. There's no rush. We have time now. That evening, after Sophie had finally crashed from her emotional day and was tucked into bed, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch again, but this time he sat beside her on the bench instead of in a separate chair. I should write to the school in Boston, Clara said. Let them know I won't be returning. They'll need to find a replacement for the fall term. Do you regret it? Daniel asked. Giving up your career? Clara thought about it. I was good at teaching, but it was never my passion. It was what was available to me, what was respectable for a woman in my position. But this, being here, being part of something real and vital, this feels like what I was meant to do. Emma used to say that, Daniel said softly, that the ranch, our life here, it was hard, but it was real. No pretenses, no masks, just honest work and honest love. Tell me about her, Clara said. If we're going to build a life together, I need to know about the woman who shaped the foundation. So Daniel talked, his voice low and warm in the darkness, about the woman he'd loved and lost. Emma had been strong and practical, but also a dreamer, someone who saw beauty everywhere and taught Sophie to do the same. She'd made the ranch a home despite their struggles, had never complained even when things were at their worst. She would have liked you, Daniel said finally. She would have loved how you are with Sophie, how you've brought music back to the house. She always said the house needed music to truly be alive. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said carefully. I know, and that's part of why this works, I think. You're not trying to be Emma. You're just being yourself, and that's exactly what Sophie and I need. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara said, we should make a list of what needs to be done around the ranch. If I'm going to be a rancher's wife, I need to learn about ranching. Daniel chuckled. You want to learn about cattle and horses and mending fences? I want to learn about your life, Clara corrected. All of it, the hard parts and the good parts. I want to be a true partner, not just someone who cooks and keeps house. That's more than most men could hope for, Daniel said softly. Well, you're not most men, Clara replied, then blushed at her forwardness. Daniel turned to face her more fully, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Clara, I need you to know something. These past 3 days, watching you with Sophie, seeing how you fit into our lives like you were always meant to be here, it's shown me something I didn't think I'd ever feel again. Hope isn't the only thing you've brought back to this house. What else? Clara whispered, her heart pounding. Joy, he said simply. You've brought joy back into our lives. And I think you might have brought love back too. Clara's breath caught. Daniel, I know it's too soon to say it properly, he continued. I know we need time, that you need to be sure. But Clara, I want you to know that for me, this isn't just about Sophie needing a mother or the ranch needing a woman's touch. This is about me needing you, wanting you, not as a replacement or a convenience, but as yourself. Clara Ellison, the woman who got off at the wrong station and made everything right. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. I think I started falling in love with you the moment Sophie called me the answer to her prayers, she admitted. And every moment since has just confirmed what my heart knew right away. I belong here, with you, with Sophie, with this life. Daniel leaned closer, his intention clear but hesitated. May I? Instead of answering, Clara closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the perfunctory kiss she'd shared with her former fiancé, nothing like what she'd imagined sharing with Harold Jameson. This was coming home, was finding her place, was the beginning of everything. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. 6 months seems like an awfully long time now. Clara laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. Well, we'll just have to keep ourselves busy. I have curtains to make, a garden to plant, and a little girl to educate. And you, Mr. Carter, have a ranch to run and a proper courtship to conduct. Yes, ma'am, Daniel said with mock solemnity, then spoiled it by stealing another kiss. A sound from the doorway made them spring apart like guilty teenagers. Sophie stood there in her nightgown, her face split by an enormous grin. I knew it, she exclaimed. I knew you were meant for us. Papa, you kissed her. Does this mean the wedding is tomorrow? Sophie Marie, you're supposed to be asleep, Daniel said, trying to sound stern but failing completely. How can I sleep when the most wonderful thing in the world is happening? Sophie ran to them, inserting herself between them on the bench. We're going to be a real family now, aren't we? We already are a real family, Clara said, pulling the little girl close. We just need time to make it official. How much time? Sophie asked suspiciously. 6 months, Daniel said. Sophie's face fell. 6 months? But that's forever. It'll go by faster than you think, Clara assured her, and we have so much to do in that time. The house needs work, the garden needs planting, and you need to keep up with your studies. Will you teach me to sing like you? Sophie asked. And to cook? And maybe to sew? Mama was teaching me to sew before she got sick. All of that and more, Clara promised. Sophie sighed contentedly, snuggling closer. This is the best day of my whole life, even better than Christmas. As the three of them sat together on the porch, Sophie chattering about wedding plans, despite her parents' gentle reminders that 6 months meant 6 months, Clara felt a peace she'd never known before. She'd gotten off at the wrong station, but somehow she'd ended up exactly where she was meant to be. The stars wheeled overhead, the vast New Mexico sky stretching endlessly above them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song. But on the porch of the Carter Ranch, there was no loneliness anymore, only the quiet promise of a future being built on a foundation of unexpected love and answered prayers. Miss Clara, Sophie said sleepily, will you sing us a song? A happy one? So Clara sang, her voice carrying across the dark prairie, singing of home and love and new beginnings. Daniel's arm came around both of them, and Sophie's breathing gradually deepened into sleep. But Clara kept singing, her heart too full for silence, her voice a testament to the beautiful accident that had brought her home. The weeks that followed Clara's decision to stay passed in a rhythm of discovery and deepening affection. September gave way to October, painting the New Mexico landscape in shades of gold and rust. And with each passing day, Clara felt herself growing more rooted in this place that had claimed her so unexpectedly. She learned the patterns of ranch life, The early morning feedings, the constant mending of fences, the delicate negotiations with weather and land that determined success or failure. Daniel taught her to read the sky for signs of rain, to recognize the different calls of the cattle, to understand the language of a place that had initially seemed so foreign. Sophie flourished under Clara's attention, her quick mind soaking up every lesson, every story, every song Clara shared with her. The little girl's reading had advanced remarkably, and she'd begun writing stories of her own, tales of brave princesses who rescued cowboys and magical horses that could fly over the mountains. Clara had started a small school of sorts, and 3 other ranch children from neighboring properties now joined Sophie for lessons 3 days a week, their parents grateful for the opportunity and paying what they could in eggs, milk, or preserved goods. "You're building something important here," Daniel told her one evening as they watched the children race across the yard after lessons, their laughter bright as bells in the crisp autumn air. "This community needed someone like you." Clara leaned against the porch railing beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, a liberty that their engagement allowed. "I needed this community too. I just didn't know it until I found it." The transformation of the house had been gradual but remarkable. The yellow gingham curtains now framed windows that sparkled with cleanliness, and Clara had sewn matching cushions for the hard wooden chairs. She'd painted the kitchen walls a soft cream color with paint mister. Patterson had ordered specially from Santa Fe, and Daniel had built her new shelves for the growing collection of books that arrived periodically from her teacher friends in Boston, who were delighted by her detailed letters about frontier life. The garden she and Sophie had planted was thriving despite the approaching winter, with hardy vegetables and the flower seeds just beginning to show promise for spring blooms. But the most remarkable transformation was in Daniel himself. The gray exhaustion that had lined his face when Clara first met him had given way to something brighter, more alive. He smiled more readily, laughed at Sophie's silly jokes, and had even been caught whistling while he worked, something that apparently hadn't happened since Emma's death, according to the ranch hands who regarded Clara with something approaching awe. It was on a particularly fine October morning, with the sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the air crisp with the promise of winter, that everything began to change. Clara was in the kitchen, teaching Sophie how to make apple butter from the windfall apples they'd gathered from an old tree near the creek, when she heard the sound of an approaching carriage, not a wagon, but an actual carriage, the kind she hadn't seen since leaving Boston. Sophie ran to the window, standing on her tiptoes to peer out. "It's a fancy lady," she reported, her voice uncertain. "She's wearing a dress like the ones in your fashion magazines, Miss Clara. And there's a man with her who looks like he swallowed something sour." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, a flutter of unease in her stomach. Visitors were rare at the ranch, and unexpected ones even more so. She opened the door to find a woman, perhaps 30 years old, dressed in an elegant traveling suit of deep burgundy wool, her dark hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken an hour to achieve. Beside her stood a thin man in a city suit holding a leather portfolio. "You must be the governess," the woman said without preamble, her voice cultured and cold. "I'm Mrs. Margaret Hargrove. I believe my arrival has been expected?" Clara's heart sank. This was the widow from Santa Fe, the one Margaret Thornton had mentioned, but she was weeks early, and how had she even known to come when Margaret had supposedly sent her away? "I'm Clara Ellison," Clara said carefully. "Mr. Carter's fiancée, not the governess. And I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. We weren't expecting anyone." Mrs. Hargrove's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Fiancée. How interesting." Mrs. Thornton's letter made no mention of an engagement. In fact, she led me to believe that Mr. Carter was quite desperately in need of feminine assistance with his household and child. "When did you receive this letter?" Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. 3 weeks ago, just after I buried my late husband. Mrs. Thornton was most insistent that I come as soon as possible, that the situation here was becoming quite urgent. She even sent train fare. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes swept over Clara's simple dress and flower-dusted apron with obvious disdain. "Though I must say, if this is the level of help Mr. Carter has secured, I can understand her concern." Sophie, who had been hiding behind Clara's skirts, suddenly stepped forward. "My papa doesn't need your help," she said with a fierceness that would have made Clara proud if she hadn't been so worried about the situation. We have Miss Clara, and she's going to be my new mama, and we're perfectly happy without any fancy ladies from Santa Fe." Mrs. Hargrove's expression grew even colder.
"Children should be seen and not heard, young lady. It's clear you've been allowed to run quite wild. No properly raised child would speak to an adult in such a manner. Sophie is spirited, not wild," Clara said, putting a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "And she's defending her home and family, which I think is admirable." "Her family?" Mrs. Hargrove laughed, a tinkling sound that had no warmth in it. "My dear woman, you're not family yet, are you? And from what Mrs. Thornton tells me, this engagement is rather sudden and perhaps not entirely appropriate." Before Clara could respond, Daniel's voice came from behind them. "What's going on here?" He stood in the doorway, having clearly rushed from whatever he'd been doing. There was dirt on his clothes and his hair was mussed, but to Clara, he'd never looked more handsome or more protective as his eyes took in the scene before him. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Hargrove said, immediately transforming her expression into something softer, more appealing. "How wonderful to finally meet you. I'm Margaret Hargrove. Your sister-in-law wrote to me about your situation, and I've come to offer my assistance." Daniel's jaw tightened. "My sister-in-law had no right to write to anyone about anything. I'm sorry you've made the journey for nothing, Mrs. Hargrove, but as you can see, we have no need of assistance." "Don't you?" Mrs. Hargrove moved closer to him, her movements graceful and practiced. "Mr. Carter, may I call you Daniel? I understand that frontier life can be limiting in its options, but surely you must see that your daughter needs proper guidance, proper education, and this ranch, well, it has such potential if managed correctly." "The ranch is managed just fine," Daniel said firmly, "and Sophie is receiving an excellent education from Miss Ellison." "Miss Ellison?" "Yes." Mrs. Hargrove's gaze swung back to Clara. "A failed Boston schoolteacher who answered a mail-order bride advertisement. Hardly the sort of influence a young lady needs." Clara felt the words like a slap, but before she could respond, Daniel had moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "Miss Ellison is an accomplished educator who has started a school that serves several families in the area. She's brought music and literature and joy back to this house. And she's shown more grace and genuine care in the few months she's been here than some people manage in a lifetime." Mrs. Hargrove's companion, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the legal matters, Mr. Carter." "Legal matters?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. The man opened his portfolio. "I'm Mr. Whitman, Mrs. Hargrove's attorney. Mrs. Thornton engaged our services to explore certain options regarding the guardianship of your daughter." The blood drained from Daniel's face. "What?" "It's nothing alarming," Mrs. Hargrove said smoothly. "Mrs. Thornton is simply concerned about Sophie's welfare. A young girl being raised in such irregular circumstances. A father who works from dawn to dusk, unable to provide proper supervision. A home without a legitimate maternal figure. And now this hasty engagement to a complete stranger? Surely you can understand how it looks." "How it looks?" Daniel's voice was rising now. "I don't give a damn how it looks. Sophie is my daughter, and she's healthy, happy, and loved. That's all that matters." "Is it?" Mrs. Hargrove asked. "Because from what I understand, the child runs wild, climbs out of windows, speaks disrespectfully to her elders. She's been found crying at her mother's grave at all hours. She's fallen behind in her proper feminine education. Can she embroider? Can she play the piano? Does she know how to conduct herself in polite society?" "She's 7 years old," Clara burst out. "She doesn't need to know how to conduct herself in polite society. She needs to know she's loved and safe and free to be herself." "And that attitude," Mrs. Hargrove said to the attorney, "is exactly why Mrs. Thornton was right to be concerned." She turned back to Daniel. "Mr. Carter, I've come here with a proposition. Allow me to stay for a few weeks. Let me show you what proper management of your household could look like. I have experience running a large estate. My late husband's ranch was 3 times the size of yours. I can teach Sophie what she needs to know to make a good marriage someday. And I can help you expand your operations, make connections with buyers in Santa Fe and beyond." "And in return?" Daniel asked, though his expression made it clear he already knew the answer. "In return, we explore the possibility of a partnership. Business at first, of course. But Mrs. Thornton seems to think, and I'm inclined to agree, that a more permanent arrangement might benefit everyone involved. Sophie made a sound like a wounded animal and pressed her face into Clara's skirt. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. "You want to marry my papa." Sophie's voice was muffled but clear. "You want to take Miss Clara's place." Mrs. Hargrove's laugh was condescending. "My dear child, one cannot take what was never properly held. Your Miss Clara is, I understand, here under rather unusual circumstances. Got off at the wrong station? Imposed upon your father's hospitality? Hardly the foundation for a lasting union." "She didn't impose," Daniel said, his voice hard as iron. "She was invited. She stayed because we wanted her to stay. Because Sophie loves her, and I—" He stopped, then squared his shoulders. "Because I love her. We're to be married in the spring, and nothing you or Margaret or anyone else says will change that." Clara's heart soared at his public declaration, but Mrs. Hargrove merely smiled. Love. How quaint. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, will love pay your bills? Will love educate your daughter? Will love protect you when the cattle buyers pass you by because you don't have the right connections?" Mr. Whitman cleared his throat again. "There's also the matter of the loan." Daniel went very still. "What loan?" "The loan your late wife's father co-signed for this ranch." "Did you think Mrs. Thornton didn't know about it? It's coming due next month, isn't it? $500. Do you have $500, Mr. Carter?" Clara felt Daniel's hand tighten on hers. She knew he didn't have that kind of money. The ranch operated on thin margins, and every spare penny went back into improvements or was saved for Sophie's future. "I'll manage," Daniel said quietly. "Or," Mrs. Hargrove said smoothly, "you could accept my help. I have the funds to pay off the loan immediately. Consider it an investment in our future partnership." "No," Daniel said immediately. "Don't be proud, Mr. Carter. Think of Sophie. Think of what's best for her." "I am thinking of her. And what's best for her is to grow up in a home filled with love, not calculation. What's best for her is to see that integrity matters more than money, that keeping your word matters more than taking the easy path." Mrs. Hargrove's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool, and fools don't keep their ranches long in this territory." She turned to Clara. "And you, Miss Ellison, do you really want to tie yourself to a man who would put his pride above his daughter's security? Who would choose poverty over prosperity out of some misguided sense of romance?" Clara stepped forward, gently moving Sophie behind her. "I want to tie myself to a man who knows the value of things that can't be bought. Who understands that Sophie needs love more than piano lessons, needs acceptance more than embroidery skills. And yes, I want to tie myself to a man who would choose integrity over convenience every single time." "Then you're a fool too," Mrs. Hargrove snapped. "Mr. Whitman, we're leaving, but this isn't over. Mrs. Thornton was right. This situation is untenable. That child deserves better than to be raised by a prideful father and a fortune-hunting stranger." "I'm not—" Clara began, but Daniel squeezed her hand, stopping her. "Let her go," he said quietly. "She's not worth our words." As the carriage rolled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, the three of them stood in silence on the porch. Finally, Sophie looked up at Daniel with tear-filled eyes. "Papa, can they really take me away?" Daniel knelt down, pulling his daughter into his arms. "No, sweetheart. No one is taking you anywhere. You're my daughter, and nothing changes that." "But the loan," Clara said quietly. "Daniel, $500. He stood, still holding Sophie. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But Clara could see the worry in his eyes, the weight of this new burden adding to all the others he carried. She made a decision in that moment, one that would have seemed impossible just months ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. "I have some money," she said. "Not much, but I have some jewelry from my mother, a few pieces that might be worth something. And I've been corresponding with my friends in Boston about possibly selling some of my lesson plans and curriculum guides to other teachers. It won't be $500, but it might help." Daniel shook his head immediately. "I can't take your money, Clara. I won't have you sacrifice." "It's not a sacrifice if it's for family," Clara interrupted.
And that's what we are, isn't it? Family. Sophie lifted her tear-stained face from Daniel's shoulder. We are family, the realest family in the whole world. That evening, after Sophie had been comforted and put to bed with extra stories and songs, Clara and Daniel sat at the kitchen table with all the ranch's financial records spread before them. The situation was worse than Clara had realized. The loan payment would take everything they had saved and more. I could sell some cattle, Daniel said, rubbing his temples. But prices are low right now, and I'd have to sell the breeding stock to make enough. Which would hurt the ranch long term, Clara said, understanding enough now about ranch operations to know that would be devastating. Yes, Daniel's voice was heavy with exhaustion. Emma's father, he co-signed the loan when we were starting out. After he died and Emma got sick, I forgot about the exact date it came due. I've been so focused on just getting through each day. Clara reached across the table to take his hand. We'll find a way. We have a month. That's time to explore options. What options? Daniel's laugh was bitter. No bank will extend the loan without collateral I don't have. Other ranchers are struggling too. And I won't go to Margaret for help, not after this stunt with Mrs. Hargrove. A knock at the door interrupted them. Daniel frowned. It was late for visitors. He opened the door to find Jake Martinez, one of his ranch hands, hat in hand. Sorry to bother you, boss, but there's something you need to know. I was in town earlier, and that fancy lady, Mrs. Hargrove, she's staying at the boarding house, and she's been asking questions about you, about the ranch, about Miss Clara. What kind of questions? Daniel asked. About your finances, about the loan. She's been talking to Mr. Patterson at the general store, Mrs. Henderson, even tried to get information from Doc Miller about Emma's death. Jake's weathered face was creased with concern. Boss, I don't like it. She's up to something. After Jake left, Daniel slumped in his chair. She's going to try to force my hand. Buy the loan from the bank, maybe, hold it over my head. Can she do that? With enough money, you can do anything out here. Daniel's voice was bleak. And if she's working with Margaret, if they really do try to make a case that I'm an unfit father... Stop, Clara said firmly. You're the best father any child could ask for, and anyone with eyes can see it. We won't let them win, Daniel. We won't let them take Sophie or the ranch. Daniel looked at her with such naked vulnerability that it took her breath away. I can't lose her, Clara. I can't lose either of you. Clara stood and moved around the table, wrapping her arms around him from behind. You won't. I promise you won't. The next few days were tense, with everyone waiting for the next move in Mrs. Hargrove's game. It came in the form of another visit, but this time she brought reinforcements. Margaret Thornton and 2 members of the Territorial Child Welfare Board. This is an informal inquiry, one of the board members, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Pemberton, said as they all sat awkwardly in the main room. We've received some concerns about the child's welfare. Concerns from whom? Daniel demanded. That's not relevant, Mrs. Pemberton said. What matters is the child's well-being. We'd like to speak with Sophie. She's at school, Clara said. I run a small school for local children. Sophie is there with 3 other students. Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. You run a school? Are you qualified? Clara lifted her chin. I taught at the Boston Ladies Academy for 5 years. I have letters of recommendation if you'd like to see them. That won't be necessary, the other board member, Mr. Harrison, said. He seemed less hostile than Mrs. Pemberton, more genuinely concerned with Sophie's welfare. Could we perhaps visit the school? See the environment? Of course, Clara said immediately, though she saw Margaret and Mrs. Hargrove exchange displeased looks. The walk to the barn that Clara had converted into a makeshift schoolroom was tense, but Clara felt her confidence grow as they approached. She could hear the children's voices reciting multiplication tables in unison, then Sophie's clear voice reading aloud from one of the new books. When they entered, 4 small faces turned to look at them. Sophie's face lit up when she saw Clara, then grew wary as she noticed the strangers. Children, we have visitors, Clara said calmly. Why don't you show them what we've been working on? What followed was perhaps the most important performance of Clara's teaching career. The children, sensing something was at stake, though not understanding what, rose to the occasion beautifully. They demonstrated their reading skills, their arithmetic, their geography knowledge. Sophie recited a poem she'd memorized, her voice clear and confident. "This is impressive," Mr. Harrison admitted. "These children are learning at a level well above what I'd expect for their ages." "Miss Clara is the best teacher in the whole territory," Timothy Patterson, the general store owner's son, piped up. "My ma says I've learned more in 2 months than I did in 2 years before." Mrs. Pemberton examined the books, the carefully written lesson plans, the charts Clara had made showing each child's progress. "This is quite professional," she admitted grudgingly. "Education is important to me," Clara said simply. "Every child deserves the chance to learn, to grow, to discover their potential." As they walked back to the house, Mr. Harrison fell into step beside Clara. "You're not what I expected, Miss Ellison. When we received the complaint from Mrs. Thornton," Clara guessed. He gave her a meaningful look but didn't confirm or deny. The concern was that an unsuitable woman had somehow inserted herself into the Carter household, was filling the child's head with inappropriate ideas. "And what do you think now?" Mr. Harrison glanced ahead to where Sophie was walking with Daniel, her small hand in his large one, chatting animatedly about her lessons. "I think that child is lucky to have you in her life." Back at the house, Mrs. Pemberton conducted her formal interview with Sophie, with all the adults present. Mrs. Hargrove and Margaret sat like vultures waiting for Sophie to say something they could use against Daniel. "Sophie," Mrs. Pemberton began, "are you happy here?" "The happiest," Sophie said immediately. "Except I'd be even happier if Papa and Miss Clara would get married tomorrow instead of waiting until spring. And you feel safe? Your father takes good care of you?" Sophie's face scrunched in confusion. "Of course he does. He's the best papa in the world. He reads to me every night and braids my hair. He's getting better at it. And he lets me help with the animals and teaches me about the stars." "What about discipline?" Margaret interjected. "Does your father correct you when you misbehave?" Sophie considered this. "He makes me do extra chores when I forget my regular ones. And once when I lied about eating the last piece of pie, he made me apologize and help Miss Clara make a new pie for everyone except me. That was fair, I think." "You lied." Mrs. Hargrove pounced on this. "Do you lie often?" "No, ma'am," Sophie said solemnly. "Papa says lying breaks trust, and trust is like a fence. Once it's broken, it takes a lot of work to mend it properly." Clara saw Mr. Harrison hide a smile at this bit of ranch wisdom. "And what about Miss Clara?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. "How do you feel about her?" Sophie's face transformed, glowing with such pure love that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Miss Clara is like sunshine after a long storm. She makes everything better. She teaches me wonderful things and sings beautiful songs and makes Papa smile in the way he used to when Mama was alive. She doesn't try to be my Mama. My Mama is in heaven, but she loves me anyway, just as I am. She says I'm perfect even when I'm not, and she never makes me feel bad for being too loud or too curious or too much." "Too much?" Mr. Harrison asked gently. "That's what Aunt Margaret says sometimes," Sophie explained matter-of-factly, "that I'm too much, too wild, too talkative, too everything. But Miss Clara says I'm just enough, exactly enough." Clara couldn't stop the tears that rolled down her cheeks. Daniel reached over and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. Mrs. Pemberton cleared her throat. "I think we've heard enough." "Mr. Harrison?" The man nodded. "I see no cause for concern here. In fact, I see a loving family doing their best under difficult circumstances." "But they're not a family," Margaret protested. "Not legally. And the financial situation is none of our concern unless it directly impacts the child's welfare," Mrs. Pemberton said firmly. "Which it clearly doesn't. This child is well-fed, well-educated, well-loved. That's all that matters to us." Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're all being fooled by sentiment instead of looking at facts." "The facts," Mr. Harrison said calmly, "are that Mr. Carter is a devoted father and Miss Ellison is providing excellent care and education. Good day, Mrs. Hargrove." After the board members left, Margaret and Mrs. Hargrove lingered on the porch. Margaret's face was twisted with frustration. "This isn't over, Daniel," she said. "You still have the loan to deal with.
And when you lose this ranch, we won't lose it, Daniel said firmly. Mrs. Hargrove smiled coldly. We'll see about that.
I've made some inquiries. That loan can be purchased by a third party if the bank agrees. And with the right incentive, banks always agree. After they left, Daniel pulled Clara and Sophie into his arms. Whatever happens with the ranch, we'll face it together. That's all that matters. But Clara could feel his tension, could see the worry he was trying to hide from Sophie. That night, after Sophie was asleep, they sat again at the kitchen table, trying to find a solution. I've been thinking, Clara said. What if we approached the other ranchers? Not for loans, but for partnerships. They could graze some of their cattle on your land for a fee, or we could share resources somehow. Daniel considered this. It's possible. Tom Bradley mentioned needing extra grazing land for the winter, and the Hendersons have been looking for someone to share the cost of a new bull for breeding. They stayed up late into the night, making plans and lists, trying to piece together enough small opportunities to make the large payment. It was exhausting, but there was something beautiful about it too. The two of them working together, fighting for their future. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Old Sam Winters, the territory's most successful rancher, appeared at their door. He was a gruff man in his 70s, widowed and childless, known for his shrewd business sense and his dislike of outsiders. Heard you're having some trouble with city folks, he said without preamble. Daniel invited him in, and Clara served coffee while Sam got to his point. That Hargrove woman came to see me, he said. Wanted to know if I'd be interested in buying your ranch once you defaulted on the loan. Offered to make it worth my while if I'd pressure the bank not to extend your deadline. Clara's heart sank, but Sam wasn't finished. I don't like being told what to do, he said gruffly. And I especially don't like outsiders coming in here thinking they can manipulate folks who've worked this land with honest sweat. Your Emma was kind to my Mary before she passed. Only person who visited her regular-like near the end. I haven't forgotten. Mr. Winters? Daniel began, but Sam held up a hand. I'm not a sentimental man, Carter, but I am a practical one. You've got good land here, good water rights. You've managed it well despite your troubles. So here's my proposition. I'll loan you the $500, interest-free, to be paid back over 5 years in cattle or labor or both. Whatever works. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. Sam, I don't know what to say. Say yes, you fool, Sam said gruffly, and invite me to the wedding. Haven't been to a good celebration in too long. Clara impulsively hugged the old man, who grumbled but didn't pull away. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Just make sure you keep that school going, Sam said. This territory needs more educated folks, not more entitled city people thinking they know everything. After Sam Winters left with their grateful promises to repay his kindness, the ranch seemed to breathe easier, as if the very walls had been holding their breath against disaster. But Clara knew better than to think Mrs. Hargrove would simply accept defeat. Women like her, with wounded pride and money to spare, didn't give up easily. She was right to worry. The next attack came more subtly, through whispers in town. Mrs. Hargrove had taken up residence at the boarding house and was holding court every afternoon in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, serving expensive tea and spreading doubts like seeds on fertile ground. Clara heard about it from Mrs. Patterson when she went to the general store for supplies. She's telling everyone you trapped poor Mr. Carter, Mrs. Patterson said in a hushed voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Says you deliberately got off at the wrong station, that you planned the whole thing after hearing about his situation from someone in Pine Ridge. Clara's hand stilled on the bolt of fabric she'd been examining. That's absurd. How could I have known anything about Daniel or Sophie? That's what I said, Mrs. Patterson replied loyally. But she's got a silver tongue, that one. And she's been generous with her money, buying rounds at the saloon for the men, donating to the church fund. People are starting to listen. Clara felt anger rise in her throat like bile. She'd worked so hard to become part of this community, and now this stranger was trying to poison it against her. But she forced herself to remain calm, to think strategically. What else is she saying? Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. She says you were dismissed from your position in Boston for improper conduct, that you answered multiple mail-order bride advertisements looking for the best opportunity, and
She paused, clearly reluctant to continue. Go on, Clara said quietly. She says she has proof. Letters or some such. She's planning to present them at the church social on Sunday. Clara's mind raced. There were no letters because none of it was true, but that didn't mean Mrs. Hargrove couldn't manufacture something convincing. She'd seen how persuasive the woman could be, how easily she wore different masks for different audiences. When Clara returned to the ranch, she found Daniel in the barn, mending tack with violent efficiency. He looked up when she entered, and she could see he'd already heard. "Jake told me," he said before she could speak, "about what she's saying in town." His jaw was tight with suppressed rage. I wanted to ride in there and confront her, but Jake pointed out that's probably what she wants. Me to lose my temper, prove I'm the unreasonable, passionate fool she's painting me as. Clara moved to him, placing her hands on his where they gripped the leather too tightly. "We won't let her win, Daniel. The truth is stronger than lies." "Is it?" Daniel's voice was bitter. "Because from where I'm standing, her lies are doing a pretty good job of taking hold." That evening, as Clara helped Sophie with her arithmetic, the little girl suddenly asked, "Miss Clara, why does that mean lady hate us so much?" Clara set down the chalk she'd been using on Sophie's slate. "What makes you think she hates us, sweetheart?" Timothy Patterson said his ma heard Mrs. Hargrove say, "We're not a real family, that you're just pretending to love us to get a home." Sophie's lower lip trembled. "But that's not true, is it?" "You do love us?" Clara pulled Sophie into her lap, holding her close. "I love you and your papa more than I've ever loved anyone or anything in my whole life. And that's the real truth, no matter what anyone else says." Then why is she trying to hurt us? It was such a simple question with such a complicated answer. How did you explain to a child that some people saw the world only in terms of what they could possess, what they could control? Sometimes, when people are unhappy inside, they try to take happiness from others. Mrs. Hargrove lost her husband, and maybe she thinks taking our happiness will make hers better. But it doesn't work that way. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then said with the devastating wisdom children sometimes possessed, "She's like winter trying to stop spring from coming. But spring always comes, doesn't it?" "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, kissing the top of her head. "Spring always comes." On Sunday, the entire community gathered for the church social, as they did every month. It was a chance for far-flung neighbors to catch up, for young people to court under the watchful eyes of their elders, for business to be conducted and gossip to be shared. Usually, Clara looked forward to these gatherings, to the sense of community they fostered. But today, walking into the church hall with Daniel and Sophie, she felt like she was walking into battle. Mrs. Hargrove was already there, holding court near the refreshment table. She'd dressed carefully for the occasion in a gown of deep purple that made her look like visiting royalty among the simple calicos and worn suits of the ranchers and their families. Margaret Thornton stood beside her, face stern with self-righteous purpose. "Ah, the happy family arrives," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice carrying across the room. Conversation stopped, heads turned. "How charming." Daniel's hand tightened on Clara's arm, but she touched his hand gently, a silent request for restraint. They took their seats with dignity, Sophie between them, and Clara was grateful to see several families nod in greeting, including the Pattersons and the Bradleys. Reverend Morrison, an elderly man with kind eyes who'd been ministering to the territory for 30 years, opened the social with a prayer, then announced that before the meal there was a matter to be addressed. "It seems we have some concerns about propriety that need discussing," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mrs. Hargrove has requested the opportunity to speak." Mrs. Hargrove rose gracefully, moving to the front of the room like an actress taking the stage. "Thank you, Reverend. I come before you today with a heavy heart, compelled by Christian duty to reveal certain truths about the woman who has insinuated herself into the Carter household." Clara forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression calm, even as her heart raced. "I have here, Mrs. Hargrove produced a letter with a flourish. "Correspondence from the Boston Ladies' Academy, where Miss Ellison claims to have taught. Would you like to know what they say about her departure?" "That's private correspondence," Daniel said, starting to rise, but Clara pulled him back down. "Let her speak.
Clara said quietly. Let everyone hear what she has to say. Mrs. Hargrove smiled triumphantly and began to read. We regret that Miss Ellison chose to leave her position so abruptly, with barely 2 weeks' notice, chasing what she called an adventure out west. While her teaching skills were adequate, her romantic notions and tendency toward flights of fancy often concerned the administration. Clara recognized the words. They were from a letter, yes, but not from the Academy's administration. It was from Mrs. Blackwell, a bitter fellow teacher who had resented Clara's popularity with the students. How Mrs. Hargrove had obtained it, she couldn't guess, but it didn't matter now. Furthermore, Mrs. Hargrove continued, I've learned that Miss Ellison answered not 1 but 3 mail-order bride advertisements, clearly shopping for the best opportunity. That's a lie, Clara said, standing despite Daniel's attempt to stop her. I answered 1 advertisement, Mr. Harold Jameson of Pine Ridge. And yes, I left my position to come west, because I wanted something more than spending my life teaching other people's children while never having a family of my own. If that makes me calculating, then so be it. You see, Mrs. Hargrove addressed the room. She admits she came here seeking opportunity, not love. And when she found the Carter Ranch with its vulnerable widower and motherless child, she saw her chance. You're twisting everything, Clara said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I came west seeking a new life. Yes, I got off at the wrong station by accident. But what I found here, the love I found here, that's real. Love? Mrs. Hargrove laughed. You've known these people for mere months. That's not love, that's opportunism. It was Sophie who broke the tension, standing on her chair so she could be seen by everyone. You don't know anything about love, she declared, her young voice ringing through the hall. Love isn't about time. My mama loved my papa from the first moment she saw him. She told me so. And I loved Miss Clara from the first moment too, when she smelled like flowers and sang like an angel and didn't push me away even though I was a stranger covered in dust. Children should be, Margaret began, but Sophie wasn't finished. You want to know what love is? Sophie continued, her voice growing stronger. Love is Miss Clara staying up all night when I had a fever last month, singing to me and cooling my head with wet cloths. Love is her teaching me to read better even though I ask too many questions. Love is her making Papa smile again, making him whistle while he works. Love is the way she looks at us like we're precious, not like we're opportunities. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as Sophie turned to address Mrs. Hargrove directly. You say Miss Clara is pretending, but you're the one who's pretending. You pretend to care about me, but you've never asked me what I want or what makes me happy. You pretend to want to help Papa, but really you just want our ranch. You pretend to be good, but good people don't try to break up families. The hall was completely silent. Then old Sam Winters stood up, his weathered face stern. I've heard enough. Mrs. Hargrove, I don't know how they do things where you come from, but here in Dust Creek we judge people by their actions, not their accusations. Tom Bradley stood next. Miss Clara started a school for our children, teaches them for free or for whatever we can spare. That's not opportunism, that's generosity. Mrs. Patterson rose as well. She's helped every woman in this town with something, recipes, sewing, letters for those who can't write. She's made our community better. One by one, people stood, sharing stories of Clara's kindness, her genuine care for the community. Even families who had initially been swayed by Mrs. Hargrove's gifts and gossip began to see the truth. Reverend Morrison raised his hand for silence. Mrs. Hargrove, I think perhaps it would be best if you concluded your business in Dust Creek. We're a small community, but we know how to recognize genuine care versus manufactured concern. Mrs. Hargrove's face had gone pale, then red. You're all fools, she spat. You'd rather have this nobody, this failed teacher, than someone who could actually improve your miserable little town. Yes, Daniel said, standing and pulling Clara up beside him. We would. Because this nobody has more grace, more genuine kindness, more real love in her little finger than you have in your entire body. You came here thinking you could buy your way into our lives, but you can't buy what really matters. Margaret Thornton stepped forward, her face pinched with anger. Daniel, you're making a mistake. When hard times come again, and they will, don't expect help from those you've spurned. I won't need it, Daniel replied, because I'll have something better. I'll have a true partner, a woman who'll stand beside me through whatever comes, not one who'll hold debts over my head like a weapon. Mrs. Hargrove gathered her dignity around her like armor. Very well, but mark my words, you'll regret this, all of you. She swept toward the door, then turned for one last verbal assault. That child will grow up wild and ignorant, that ranch will fail, and you'll all still be scratching in the dirt while those of us with sense move on to better things. After she left, followed by a furious Margaret, the social continued, but there was a different quality to it now. People approached Clara and Daniel, offering support, sharing their own stories of struggle and judgment. The community had been tested and had chosen love over money, authenticity over artifice. That night, as they returned to the ranch, Sophie asleep in Daniel's arms after the emotional day, Clara felt a deep sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. The threat had passed, but more than that, she'd been truly accepted, truly claimed by this community as one of their own. Daniel put Sophie to bed while Clara made tea, and they met on the porch as had become their evening ritual. But tonight, Daniel pulled her close on the bench, his arm around her shoulders. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "The way you stood up to her, the way you didn't let her lies take root." "Sophie was the magnificent one," Clara replied. "She has your courage, you know, that fierce protectiveness of what matters." "She has your heart," Daniel countered, "that ability to see the best in people, to love without reservation." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Daniel said, "Clara, I know we agreed on 6 months, but after today, after everything, I don't want to wait anymore. I don't need more time to know you're the one I want beside me for the rest of my life." Clara's heart leaped, but she forced herself to be practical. "Daniel, we should still be sensible. Make sure—" He silenced her with a gentle kiss. "I've been sensible my whole life. I was sensible when I married Emma. We knew each other for 2 years before I proposed, and I loved her dearly, but Clara, what I feel for you is different. It's not less, it's just different. With Emma, love grew slowly, like a tree putting down roots. With you, it was like lightning, sudden, powerful, undeniable. I don't need 6 months to know that lightning struck true." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "When?" "Christmas," Daniel said immediately. "Give me 2 months to court you properly, to prove to anyone still doubting that this is real. Then marry me on Christmas Eve, when the whole world is celebrating miracles." "That's only 8 weeks away," Clara pointed out. 8 weeks too long if you ask me," Daniel replied, then grew serious. "But Clara, I want you to be sure. Not about us. I can see in your eyes you're sure about us. But about this life. Ranch life is hard. There will be droughts and floods, sick cattle and failed crops. There will be times when we have barely enough, when the work seems endless and the rewards too small." Clara turned to face him fully, taking his weathered hands in hers. "Do you remember what Sophie said that first day? That God sent me, that I was the answer to her prayers? I thought she was just a lonely little girl seeing what she wanted to see. But Daniel, I think she was right. Every choice I made, every moment that led me here, getting on that train, mishearing the station name, accepting your offer of shelter, it all brought me home. Not to a place, but to you and Sophie." "Home," Daniel repeated softly. "You've made this place a home again, Clara. But more than that, you've made us a family, a complete family." "We were already a family," Clara said. "I just got to join it." They kissed then, long and sweet under the vast New Mexico stars, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. 8 weeks, Daniel said. "Think you can plan a wedding in 8 weeks?" "I can do anything with you beside me," Clara replied. The next morning brought unexpected joy. A letter arrived from Clara's friends in Boston, containing not just warm wishes but a bank draft for a surprising sum. "Your curriculum guides have been approved by the Boston School Board," the letter read. "They want to purchase them for use throughout the district. Enclosed is the first payment, with more to follow quarterly." Clara stared at the draft in shock. It was enough to pay back a significant portion of Sam's loan immediately, enough to secure the ranch's immediate future. "This is wonderful," Daniel exclaimed, spinning her around the kitchen while Sophie danced around them, not entirely sure what was happening, but delighted by the celebration. "We can pay Sam back faster than planned," Clara said breathlessly. "And maybe even expand the school, get proper supplies." "You've saved us," Daniel said, but Clara shook her head. "We saved each other. That's what families do." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. News of the Christmas Eve wedding spread quickly, and the entire community seemed determined to make it special. Mrs. Patterson and the other ladies organized a quilting bee, creating a beautiful wedding quilt as their gift. The men, led by Tom Bradley and Sam Winters, repaired and painted the church, making it shine like new. Sophie threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm that bordered on mania. She practiced walking slowly for her role as flower girl, until Daniel joked she looked like she was walking through molasses. She helped Clara design her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in ivory wool that Clara sewed herself with help from the town's women. "You need something blue," Sophie announced one day, producing a small box. Inside was a delicate hair comb decorated with blue stones. It was Mama's. She wore it at her wedding. Papa said she would want you to have it." Clara looked at Daniel, who nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Emma would have loved you, Clara. She would have been so happy to know you're the one raising Sophie, loving her, teaching her to be strong and kind." Clara carefully placed the comb in her hair where it caught the light like captured sky. "I'll treasure it always. It's an honor to wear something of hers." "You're not replacing her," Sophie said seriously, showing wisdom beyond her years. "You're just adding more love. Mama used to say love doesn't divide, it multiplies." As Christmas approached, the ranch was transformed. Pine boughs decorated every surface, filling the house with the sharp, sweet scent of evergreen. Sophie and Clara baked cookies and breads to share with neighbors, continuing a tradition Emma had started. Daniel surprised them both with a Christmas tree, a small piñon pine he'd cut and hauled from the mountains. "We never had a tree before," Sophie breathed, touching the branches reverently. "Your mother always wanted one," Daniel explained. "But I could never manage it alone. Now, with Clara here, it feels right." They decorated it with strings of popcorn and dried berries, paper stars Sophie cut out and painted, and candles in small tin holders that would be lit only on Christmas Eve. At the top, Sophie placed a star she'd made from tin and decorated with tiny pieces of mirror that caught and reflected the light. 3 days before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived. Harold Jameson, the man Clara had originally intended to marry, stood on their porch looking weather-worn and confused. "Miss Ellison," he said uncertainly when Clara opened the door. "I'm Harold Jameson. I know you sent a telegram saying you couldn't come, but I had to know why. I came all this way to Pine Ridge to meet you, and they told me you never arrived, that you got off in Dust Creek instead." Clara felt Daniel come up behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Mr. Jameson, I'm so sorry. Please, come in. You deserve an explanation." Harold was nothing like Clara had imagined. He was older, perhaps 50, with a face that might have been handsome once, but now showed the deep lines of disappointment and loneliness. As Clara served coffee and explained what had happened, his expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something like relief. "So you found love," he said simply. "Real love, not just an arrangement." "Yes," Clara said. "I'm sorry if I hurt you or wasted your time." Harold shook his head. "You did me a favor, Miss Ellison. Sitting here, seeing how you look at him, how he looks at you, how that little girl glows with happiness. This is what I wanted, but didn't know how to ask for in a letter. I wanted a family, not just a wife. I wanted love, not just companionship." He stood to leave, then paused. "Might I offer a wedding gift? I know it's unusual, but I brought this for the woman I was to marry." He produced a small leather-bound book. "It's poetry." Seemed appropriate for a teacher. Clara accepted it with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I hope you find what you're looking for." "I think I will," he said, tipping his hat. "Seeing what you have here, I know now what to look for. Not just someone willing, but someone whose eyes light up when they see me, the way yours do for Mr. Carter." After he left, Daniel pulled Clara close.
That was hard for him, coming here. He's a good man, Clara said. He deserves happiness. So do you, Daniel replied. So do we all. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that was rare for this part of New Mexico. Sophie declared it a miracle, proof that God blessed their wedding. The entire community gathered in the small church, which glowed with candles and smelled of pine and cinnamon. Clara walked down the aisle on Sam Winters's arm. He'd gruffly volunteered, saying someone needed to make sure she didn't run off, wearing her ivory dress with Emma's blue comb in her hair. Sophie preceded her, scattering rose petals she'd dried and saved from the wild roses by the creek, wearing a new dress Clara had made in soft pink. But Clara only had eyes for Daniel, standing at the altar in his best suit, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears as he watched her approach. When Sam placed her hand in Daniel's, she felt the circuit complete, felt the electricity Sophie had talked about that first day. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with obvious joy, speaking of second chances, of unexpected blessings, of love that comes when we least expect it, but most need it. Clara, Daniel said when it came time for vows, his voice strong and clear. You got off at the wrong station and walked into our lives like an answered prayer. You brought music and laughter back to our home. You gave Sophie a mother's love and guidance. You gave me hope when I thought I'd never hope again, joy when I thought joy had died with Emma. I promise to love you, to stand beside you through drought and plenty, through sorrow and celebration. I promise to be the man you deserve, the partner you need, the love you chose when you could have chosen easier paths. Clara had to swallow hard before she could speak. Daniel, I thought I knew what I wanted when I got on that train in Boston. I thought I wanted safety and respectability. But you and Sophie taught me that what I really wanted was to matter, to belong, to love, and be loved without reservation. You gave me a daughter to cherish, a home to nurture, a community to serve, and a love that takes my breath away. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to raise Sophie with wisdom and love, to make our house a home filled with music and laughter and hope. I promise to choose you, again and again every day, in all the small moments and the large ones. And I promise, Sophie piped up, making everyone laugh, to not interrupt too much, and to do my chores without being asked more than 3 times. Reverend Morrison smiled. I think that's a promise we'll hold you to, young lady. Now, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and by God above, I pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was sweet and full of promise, and when they pulled apart, the entire church erupted in celebration. As they turned to face their community as a married couple, Clara saw not a single dry eye. Even gruff Sam Winters was suspiciously wiping at his cheek. The reception was held in the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of dishes everyone had contributed. There was dancing to fiddle music, Sophie spinning wildly with anyone who would partner her. Daniel and Clara's first dance was to Shenandoah, which Clara sang softly as they swayed together, the same song she'd sung that first night in their kitchen. No regrets, Daniel whispered as they danced. Only one, Clara replied. When he looked concerned, she smiled. I regret we have to wait until Sophie's asleep to be truly alone. Daniel's laugh rumbled through his chest. Mrs. Carter, you're going to be the death of me. Mrs. Carter, Clara repeated wonderingly. I like the sound of that. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for home, Sophie sleepy in Daniel's arms, Clara looked back at the church filled with their friends and neighbors. Mrs. Hargrove was long gone, presumably back to Santa Fe to find some other opportunity. Margaret hadn't attended, but Clara hoped that someday she might soften, might see that love mattered more than propriety. Ready to go home, Mrs. Carter? Daniel asked. Clara looked at her husband, at her daughter, at the life they'd built from accident and choice, from wrong stations and right decisions. I've been home since the day I arrived, she said. I just didn't know it yet. As their wagon rolled toward the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars, Sophie stirred in Clara's arms. Mama Clara, she said sleepily, the new name they'd agreed on flowing naturally. Is it true that God answers prayers? Clara kissed the top of her head, feeling Daniel's hand find hers in the darkness. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes in ways we don't expect, but Yes, he answers prayers. I knew it, Sophie mumbled, settling back to sleep. I knew he'd send you to us. And as the Carter family rode home through the silent, holy night, Clara sent up her own prayer of gratitude for wrong trains and right choices, for stubborn ranchers and persistent little girls, for second chances and unexpected love. She'd thought she was heading toward one life, but had found another entirely, and she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her home. The first months of their marriage passed in a golden haze of discovery and deepening love. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came the fulfillment of Clara's carefully planted seeds, both literal and metaphorical. The garden she and Sophie had planned burst into bloom, wild roses climbing the fence posts and mixing with the cultivated flowers to create a riot of color that made the ranch house look like something from a fairy tale. The school had grown too, with 8 regular students now, and Clara had received another payment from Boston for her curriculum guides, enough to purchase real school supplies and even some new books. It was on a particularly fine April morning, with the air sweet with the scent of blooming sage and the sky an endless blue, that Sophie made her announcement at breakfast. I think we need a baby, she said matter-of-factly, spreading jam on her biscuit with careful precision. Clara nearly choked on her coffee, and Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What brought this on, sweetheart? Clara managed, trying to keep her voice steady while avoiding Daniel's eyes, knowing she'd burst into either laughter or embarrassment if she met his gaze. Well, Sophie said reasonably, Timothy Patterson's mama is having a baby, and Mrs. Bradley too. And I heard Mrs. Henderson telling Mrs. Patterson that it was about time you and Papa gave me a little brother or sister. She said spring was the season for new life. Daniel cleared his throat. Sophie, babies aren't something you just decide to have like deciding to get new chickens. Why not? Sophie asked with the devastating logic of an 8-year-old. Don't you want more children? Don't you want our family to grow? I felt her cheeks burn as she caught Daniel's eye across the table. They'd been married 4 months now, and while their physical relationship was everything Clara had dreamed and more, they hadn't yet been blessed with news of a child. It wasn't for lack of trying, though that wasn't something they could explain to Sophie. Of course we'd love more children, Clara said carefully. But babies come when God decides it's time, not when we decide. Sophie considered this, then brightened. Then I'll pray for one. I prayed for you, and you came. So if I pray for a baby, one will come too. After Sophie ran off to feed the chickens, Daniel moved around the table to pull Clara into his arms. Are you all right? I know the women in town have been asking questions. Clara leaned into his strength, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and soap and something uniquely Daniel. I'm fine. It's only been 4 months, but I admit when I see the other women with their babies, I wonder, hey, Daniel tilted her chin up to look at him. If it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, we have Sophie, and she's more than enough blessing for any family. Don't let the gossips make you feel less than you are. Clara kissed him, marveling as always at how this good man had become hers. You always know just what to say. I'm learning, Daniel replied with a grin. Being married to a teacher means I'd better stay sharp. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, many horses moving fast. Daniel frowned, moving to the window, and his expression darkened. It's Margaret, he said, and she's brought company. Clara joined him at the window and saw not just Margaret Thornton, but also Mrs. Hargrove, whom Clara had hoped never to see again, along with a man in an expensive suit who looked distinctly out of place on horseback, and surprisingly, Sheriff Coleman from town. What could they want? Clara asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. Nothing good, Daniel replied grimly. Stay inside with Sophie. I'll handle this. But Clara shook her head. We face things together, remember? That's what we promised. They met the group on the porch, Daniel's arm protectively around Clara's waist. Sophie, sensing trouble with the uncanny instinct children possess, appeared at Clara's other side, her small hand slipping into Clara's larger one. Daniel, Margaret said without preamble, we need to discuss the situation with the ranch. What situation? Daniel asked, his voice carefully controlled. The loan is being paid back on schedule. The ranch is prospering. There is no situation. The man in the expensive suit stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Carter, there is. I'm James Whitworth, attorney at law. I represent Mrs. Hargrove's interests, and we've discovered some irregularities in the deed to this property. Clara felt Daniel go rigid beside her. What kind of irregularities? It seems, Mrs. Hargrove said, her smile sharp as a blade, that when your late wife's father co-signed your loan, he also placed a lien on the property as collateral, a lien that was never properly discharged after his death. That's impossible, Daniel said. Emma's father would never— Oh, but he did, Margaret interrupted. I have the papers right here. Father was always careful about business matters. He wanted to ensure that if anything happened to Emma, the ranch would revert to the family. But Emma died 2 years ago, Clara pointed out. Why are you only bringing this up now? Margaret's expression was triumphant. Because I only recently found the papers while going through Father's old documents. And the terms are quite specific. If Emma died without male issue, the ranch was to revert to the family estate within 3 years of her death. Sophie is Emma's issue, Daniel said fiercely. She's her daughter. Female, Mrs. Hargrove said dismissively. The document specifically states male issue. Your daughter doesn't count. Clara felt Sophie press closer to her side, and she pulled the child protectively against her. This is ridiculous. You can't just take someone's home based on some old paper that conveniently appeared. Sheriff Coleman, who'd been silent until now, spoke up reluctantly. I'm afraid if the papers are legitimate, they might have a case, ma'am. I've come to ensure everything is handled legally, not to take sides. How much? Daniel asked suddenly, his voice flat. What do you want, Margaret? You don't care about this ranch. You never have. So, what's your price? Margaret exchanged a look with Mrs. Hargrove before answering. It's not about money, Daniel. It's about what's best for Sophie. Don't you dare, Daniel started, but Margaret continued. If you agree to send Sophie to live with me, to be raised properly as a young lady should be, we'll discharge the lien. She'll attend finishing school in Santa Fe, learn all the things she needs to know to make a good marriage someday. Over my dead body, Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. That could be arranged, Mrs. Hargrove murmured, just loud enough to be heard. There was a moment of shocked silence, then Sophie pulled away from Clara and stepped forward, her small chin lifted defiantly. I won't go, she said clearly. You can't make me. I'll run away. I'll hide in the mountains. I'll live with the coyotes before I'll live with you, Aunt Margaret. You see, Margaret said to the others, this is what comes of improper raising. The child is wild, uncontrollable. The child is brave, Sam Winters' voice came from behind them. Everyone turned to see the old rancher approaching on horseback, along with Tom Bradley and several other neighbors. And she's right. You can't make her do anything. This is a private matter, Mr. Winters, Mr. Whitworth said stiffly. Nothing's private in Dust Creek, Sam replied, dismounting with surprising agility for his age. Especially not when vultures come circling good people. He walked up to the porch and stood beside Daniel. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I know a thing or two about land rights in this territory. Mind if I look at those papers? Margaret hesitated, then handed them over. Sam studied them carefully, then smiled, a sharp, satisfied expression that made Mrs. Hargrove shift uncomfortably. Well, well, Sam said. This is interesting. Very interesting indeed. What? Daniel asked. This lien, Sam said slowly, is written against the original homestead claim. But Daniel, you filed a new claim when you expanded the ranch 2 years ago, didn't you? After Emma passed? Daniel's eyes widened with understanding. Yes, I did. I filed for the additional 40 acres to the south. Which means, Sam continued, that the current ranch is a different legal entity than the one mentioned in this lien. The lien applies to the original 20 acres, not the expanded property. Mr. Whitworth snatched the papers, studying them with growing frustration. That may be technically true, but technically true is the only kind of true that matters in law, Sheriff Coleman said with barely concealed satisfaction. He'd clearly been uncomfortable with this whole situation. If the lien doesn't apply to the current property configuration, then it's invalid.
Mrs. Hargrove's face had gone white with rage. "This is absurd. You're splitting hairs." "No," Clara said, finding her voice. "We're protecting our family." "Something you wouldn't understand, since you seem to think families can be bought and sold like cattle." "How dare you?" Mrs. Hargrove began, but she was interrupted by the arrival of another rider. Harold Jameson, of all people, trotted up on a dusty horse, looking tired but determined. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Rode all night from Pine Ridge when I heard what was happening." "Harold?" Clara said in astonishment. "What are you doing here?" Harold dismounted and pulled a paper from his jacket. "Bringing this. It's a signed affidavit from Emma Carter's father, dated a month before his death, discharging any and all claims against the Carter Ranch. I witnessed it myself. I knew Emma's father through cattle deals. He asked me to witness it because he wanted to make sure his daughter and son-in-law were protected." "Why didn't you say something before?" Daniel asked. "Because I didn't know it was needed until I heard about this business in Pine Ridge yesterday. I keep all my important papers, and I knew I still had this." Harold handed the document to Sheriff Coleman. "That should settle any questions about liens or claims." Margaret's face cycled through several shades of red. "This is impossible. You're all lying, conspiring against me." "No, Margaret," Daniel said quietly. "We're just a community standing together. Something you never understood, even when Emma tried to include you." "Emma," Margaret spat. "Always Emma. Perfect Emma who could do no wrong, who married beneath her, who died and left everything in chaos." "Don't," Daniel warned, but Margaret was beyond stopping. "She was my sister, and she chose this." Margaret gestured wildly at the ranch. "Over family, over propriety, over everything she'd been raised to value. And now you've done it again, bringing this nobody into our family." "Clara's not a nobody," Sophie said fiercely. "She's somebody. She's our somebody. She's the answer to prayers and the bringer of songs and the maker of homes. She's worth 100 of you, Aunt Margaret." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Margaret turned on her heel and stalked toward her carriage. "This isn't over," she said. "I'll find another way." "No," Sheriff Coleman said firmly. "You won't. Because if you continue to harass the Carter family, I'll be forced to investigate some interesting rumors about your late husband's business dealings. Rumors about forged documents and stolen claims. You wouldn't want that, would you?" Margaret went pale, then climbed into her carriage without another word. Mrs. Hargrove followed, but not before delivering one last venomous look. "You'll regret this," she said to Clara. "Women like you always get what's coming to them." "I already got what's coming to me," Clara replied calmly. "A loving husband, a wonderful daughter, and a community that stands by us. What more could I want?" After they left, the neighbors lingered, Sam organizing an impromptu celebration of the threat's defeat. Harold Jameson stayed too, and Clara was pleased to see him talking with Amy Bradley, Tom's unmarried sister who'd been widowed young. Perhaps something good would come from all of this chaos. That night, after the neighbors had gone home and Sophie was asleep, Clara and Daniel sat on their bed, exhausted from the emotional day. "We almost lost everything," Daniel said quietly. "If Sam hadn't noticed about the land claims, if Harold hadn't kept that paper." "But they did," Clara said, taking his face in her hands. "That's what matters. We're safe. Sophie's safe. The ranch is ours." Daniel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know what I'd do if I lost you. Either of you." "You won't," Clara promised. "We're too stubborn to be gotten rid of that easily." Daniel laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "That's true. I married the most stubborn woman in the territory." "Second most stubborn," Clara corrected. "Sophie's got us both beat." They held each other in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the creak of the house settling around them. It was the sound of home, of permanence, of a life built on love rather than contracts. A month passed peacefully, the ranch returning to its routine. Clara's school was thriving, with talk of building a proper schoolhouse in town. Daniel's cattle were fetching good prices, and they'd been able to pay back half of Sam's loan already. Sophie had started writing a book about their adventures, which she read aloud at dinner each night, much to her parents' amusement and occasional mortification when she included too accurate details about their romantic moments. It was on a bright May morning that Clara realized she'd been feeling queasy for several days. She'd attributed it to the stress of recent events, but when the smell of coffee, usually her favorite morning scent, sent her running for the wash basin, she began to suspect something else. She waited another week to be sure, then another to visit Dr. Miller in town. When he confirmed what she suspected, Clara sat in his office with tears streaming down her face. Now, Doc Miller said kindly. These are happy tears, I hope? The happiest, Clara confirmed. It's just, after everything we've been through, to have this blessing now. Sometimes the best things come when we stop trying so hard and just live, Doc Miller said, with the wisdom of someone who'd delivered hundreds of babies over his career. You're healthy. The baby seems to be developing well. I'd say you'll have a Christmas baby, or thereabouts. Clara practically floated home, her secret burning bright inside her. She wanted to tell Daniel immediately, but Sophie was with him, helping with the afternoon chores, so she waited, planning the perfect moment. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Clara cleared her throat. I have something to tell you both. Daniel looked up with concern. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect, Clara said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Sophie, remember when you said we needed a baby? Sophie's eyes went wide. Yes? Well, it seems your prayers worked. We're going to have a baby, around Christmas. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then Sophie let out a shriek of joy that probably scared every chicken in the coop, and Daniel was around the table in 2 strides, lifting Clara out of her chair and spinning her around. Careful, Clara laughed. I'm in a delicate condition. A baby, Daniel said wonderingly, setting her down gently but keeping his arms around her. Our baby. A brother, Sophie said decisively. I want a brother. I'll teach him everything, how to ride, how to read, how to find the best fishing spots. It might be a sister, Clara pointed out. Sophie considered this. That's okay too. I'll teach her the same things. As the initial excitement settled, they sat together planning and dreaming. Daniel immediately started worrying about making the house safer for a baby, while Sophie began a list of names that grew increasingly creative as the evening wore on. Absolutely not, Daniel said when Sophie suggested Mighty Thunder Carter for a boy. He'd never forgive us. What about Sunshine Melody for a girl? Sophie tried. How about we wait and see the baby before we decide? Clara suggested diplomatically. That night, as Clara lay in Daniel's arms with his hand protective over her still flat stomach, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been a lonely teacher on a train to meet a stranger. Now she was a wife, a mother, a teacher to a growing group of children, and soon to be a mother again. Are you happy? Daniel asked softly in the darkness. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, Clara replied. I'm complete. Like all the pieces of my life finally fit together the way they were supposed to. Even though you got off at the wrong station, Daniel teased. Especially because I got off at the wrong station, Clara said firmly. It was the best mistake I ever made. Summer arrived with its usual fierce heat, but Clara barely noticed, too caught up in the changes in her body and the excitement of the coming child. Sophie had appointed herself Clara's official helper, fetching things so Clara didn't have to bend over, singing to the baby every night because babies need to know songs from the very beginning. The community embraced the news with joy. Mrs. Patterson organized a quilting bee to make baby blankets, while Mrs. Bradley shared all her remedies for morning sickness. Even crusty old Sam Winters was caught knitting tiny socks, though he claimed they were for the barn cats. It was in August, when Clara was beginning to show properly, and Sophie was deep in her plans for being the best big sister in the territory, that unexpected news arrived. Margaret Thornton had died suddenly of a heart attack in Santa Fe. Despite everything, Daniel grieved. She had been Emma's sister, after all, Sophie's aunt, even if she'd lost her way in bitterness and propriety. Should we go to the funeral? Clara asked. Daniel considered, then shook his head. She wouldn't want us there, but we'll say prayers for her soul. Emma would want that. The news that came a week later was even more shocking. Margaret had left everything to Sophie. Not to Daniel, but specifically to Sophie, in a will dated just days before her death. The letter that came with the legal documents was in Margaret's rigid handwriting. Sophie, I was wrong. Not about propriety or manners or any of those things I tried to teach you, but about what matters most. Your mother knew something I never learned, that love is worth more than position, that joy matters more than propriety. I see now that your father chose well in his second wife. She gives you what I never could, acceptance of who you are rather than who you should be. Use this inheritance to be free, to be educated, to be yourself. Perhaps that will be my redemption. Your Aunt Margaret. The inheritance was substantial, enough to ensure Sophie's education, enough to expand the ranch, enough to secure their future completely. But more than the money, it was the acknowledgement that mattered, the final acceptance of their family. She understood at the end, Daniel said quietly. Emma always said Margaret had a good heart buried under all that starch and propriety. Fall arrived with its golden light and cool breezes, and Clara grew round with the baby. Daniel was endlessly fascinated by the movement he could feel when he placed his hands on her belly, while Sophie kept up a running commentary to the baby about everything happening on the ranch. The leaves are turning yellow now, she'd report seriously to Clara's stomach. That means winter's coming, which is when you're coming too. Don't worry, we have lots of warm blankets ready for you. The school had moved into a proper building in town, built with community effort and some of Sophie's inheritance. Clara had trained Amy Bradley, now Amy Jameson, having married Harold in a sweet ceremony in September, to help with teaching, necessary now that Clara moved more slowly. It was on a cold December morning, with snow falling softly outside, that Clara felt the first pains. Daniel, who'd been hovering anxiously for weeks, immediately wanted to fetch Doc Miller, but Clara laughed. First babies take their time, she said. We have hours yet. Let's have breakfast. But this baby, perhaps taking after Sophie in eagerness, had other plans. By noon, Clara was in full labor, with Doc Miller arriving just in time. This one's in a hurry, he said cheerfully. Must know it's almost Christmas. Daniel held Clara's hand through it all, whispering encouragement and love, while Sophie waited anxiously in the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson, who'd come to help. When the baby's cry finally rang through the house, strong and healthy and perfect, Clara saw tears streaming down Daniel's face. It's a boy, Doc Miller announced. A fine, healthy boy. Daniel kissed Clara's forehead, then looked at their son with wonder. He's perfect. You're perfect. This is all perfect. Sophie burst into the room, unable to wait any longer. A brother? Really? Can I hold him? Once Clara was settled and the baby cleaned and wrapped, Sophie sat carefully in the chair beside the bed, and Daniel placed the baby in her arms. Hello, little brother, Sophie whispered. I'm Sophie. I'm going to teach you everything, how to read and ride horses and find the best fishing spots. And I'll tell you stories about how Mama Clara got off at the wrong station, but it was really the right station, and how Papa smiled again, and how we became a real family. What should we name him? Daniel asked. Sophie looked at the baby thoughtfully. Something strong but gentle, like Papa, and something musical, like Mama Clara. They eventually settled on James Samuel Carter, James for Clara's father, Samuel for Sam Winters, who'd been such a friend to them. Sam pretended to be gruff about it, but Clara caught him wiping his eyes when he held his namesake for the first time. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside and the house glowed with candlelight, the Carter family gathered around the fire. Sophie was reading her finished book aloud, The Story of How We Became Us, while baby James slept in Clara's arms and Daniel kept one arm around them both. And that, Sophie read from her final page, is how God answered our prayers in the most unexpected way. He sent us Mama Clara on the wrong train to the wrong station at exactly the right time. But decide, because sometimes the best things in life come from beautiful accidents, and sometimes what seems like a mistake is really a miracle in disguise. Clara looked around at her family, her husband who'd taught her that love could bloom again after loss, her daughter who'd claimed her from the very first moment, her son who was the promise of their future, and knew that every word Sophie had written was true. She'd gotten off at the wrong station, but she'd ended up exactly where she belonged. The mail-order bride who'd never made it to her intended destination had found something better than she'd ever dared to dream, a love that was chosen rather than arranged, a family that was built on faith and hope rather than contracts and convenience. Outside, the church bells began to ring, calling the community to Christmas Eve service. The Carters bundled up against the cold, James wrapped snugly against Clara's chest, Sophie dancing ahead through the snow, Daniel's arms strong around Clara's waist. As they walked toward the church, where their friends and neighbors waited, where candles would glow and hymns would rise into the cold night air, Clara thought about all the small choices and accidents that had led to this moment. A misheard station name, a little girl's immediate love, a widower's reluctant hope, a community's embracing arms. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was thanking God or fate or the universe itself. "For what?" Daniel asked softly. "For everything. For the wrong station that turned out to be right. For the instant family I didn't know I needed. For this life I never dared to dream of." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her in the softly falling snow. "Thank you," he said, "for taking a chance on a broken man and his wild daughter. For bringing music back to our lives. For making us whole again." "We made each other whole," Clara corrected. "That's what families do." Sophie ran back to them, her face bright with excitement and snow. "Come on! We'll be late, and I want everyone to see baby James in his Christmas outfit." As they entered the warm, glowing church, welcomed by their community with smiles and congratulations, Clara knew that this was what happily ever after really looked like. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real beginning, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. The mail-order bride who'd never reached her destination had found her home, and it was more beautiful than any advertisement could have promised, because real love, the kind that grows from accident and choice, from daily kindness and shared struggle, from laughter and tears and everything in between, that kind of love was worth getting off at any number of wrong stations to find. And as they sang Silent Night with their neighbors, baby James sleeping peacefully through it all, Sophie's voice rising pure and sweet above the rest, Daniel's hand warm in hers, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where God had always intended her to be. The wrong station had been the right one all along.